of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you would please remain standing and pray with me. Lord God, Father God, Sovereign God, Lord, for all the things you are to us, we just say thank you. We thank you for this village, and we thank you for allowing us to be a part of your creation. I ask tonight, Lord, that the conversations we have and the decisions we make are pleasing in your sight. As we pray in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Sorry. I put them all there. No, there's plenty there. I used to.
So just make sure
I do have
for general public comments, we don't have anybody sign up. Alright. So that moves us to additions, deletions, and adoption of the agenda. I would like to strike number 14 because I haven't received any additional information from the county assistant manager. I'll bring that back when I get more information. And I'd like to add rules of procedure into item number 13. Does anybody else have anything?
I'll do the consent agenda.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to pull out item number 3B and move it to an open discussion point.
So we can put it number 6A after the plan.
That'll be fine, yeah. Do we have any information to merit an agenda point for the comp plan? Any updates?
Ron, would you talk about an intersection or you want a special section?
Whatever pleases the council is fine with me.
We'll just add it into your.
That's fine.
Anything else there?
That's it.
Lloyd?
Motion to approve as amended.
I'll second.
All in favor? That brings us to Cheryl and our finance officer report.
Well, that was adopting the agenda, right?
Oh, sorry. So that brings us to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion for the consent agenda with the renewal of item B?
No motion.
I'll second.
Motion, I second it.
All in favor? All right, now finance officer report.
Okay, the finance report for the end of December. We are up to 70% of tax received, which is good. We are doing well on our shared revenues. They're all looking good. Looking better than we had feared. During the month, let's see. Aside from our regular things, we did pay for another quarter of the deputy, 1 quarter of the year, and don't think there's anything too extraordinary. Just today I wrote the last check on the playground. So I don't have anything real spectacular to talk about.
Any questions?
Do we hold any retainage on the playground equipment, or is it paid in full?
At this point, it will be paid in full.
Okay. And then the CARES grant monies. Have we received everything and sent them everything to cover all the requests they have?
We've done all our reporting. There's one small payment left to be received from them. I'll check on when we'll be getting it.
Cheryl, I know you said you made the last payment on the playground. What about the additional benches we approved last month?
They have not been ordered yet. I told Amy and John, I don't know, is John here? I guess not. I told them, let me know what you choose and I'll issue a purchase order, but
Okay.
Any other questions for Cheryl? So this is for our planning board report, and then we'll follow the one.
Good evening, Happy New Year's. Thank you. For the planning board, we did not get any report from the last meeting because we didn't have a meeting in December. And I have not seen the agenda for January. That's kind of where we are. Is that agenda coming out in the next couple of days, I think? Anything on the agenda worth mentioning?
We will start talking about 160D updates, and the final plat for Caddis.
Okay. Okay.
Those are probably most of them. And you're presented. I don't know if you want to say about that.
There's been some interest. Well, the other thing I'd email or left a message about. So some interest in rezoning. We've updated our RA40 zone. So I got interest for my neighbors. Actually, my family and I are interested in rezoning RA40 as well. So that's just local on my street. I'm not sure if any other interest has come up or if it's made known out there, right, what we can do with RA40. So I know it. I talk to my neighbors. As soon as I start talking, they're interested in the RA40 zoning opportunities that we have. I'm wondering if we should start with our communications committee. Maybe that's one thing to think about. Can we do something to help people west of Chapel know what's available in RA40? That's all.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Then
All right. We know the Caddison final plat coming along. We're looking at the final plat for Phase 7 and 8 of Heritage right now. If the Coy Farm moves forward after the night, we'll probably be looking at that in the coming months. As you approved in the consent agenda, the cell tower on Newtown Road, the public hearing for that's been moved to the February 8th meeting. Of course, the subdivision and zoning ordinance have been amended for the new tree conservation standards and related issues having to do with vegetation. And we're still reviewing Carolina Pets. They've received comments, and we have not heard back from them yet. We actually just the other day received the TIA, second TIA from Five Stones Church, and just Cheryl had asked me to mention this tonight as well during this section, and she might be able to recount some more specific instances of this, but there have been lots of activity in the village, lots of accessory buildings being built, especially in small additions to homes. And the zoning ordinance currently requires that there be a succession of professionally prepared surveys for each various steps in the process, permit application, foundation survey, and a final. And I think there's probably some instances where I was lucky enough to be here a couple weeks ago when one gentleman called in expressing some frustration, shall we say, about what they needed to do. And his case is probably one where it would be good to have a survey, but I think there are at least a couple different today where it might have been unclear as what needed to be done. And that's not something that we can't say you don't have to have a survey prepared because it's spelled out in the ordinance. And I think the staff probably has some concerns about the number of surveys and expenses that are going towards doing that kind of activity for relatively minor things. When it's, even in cases where it's very clear that something would be permitted due to its distance from a lot line or a setback. So I don't know, Cheryl, if you wanted to add any specifics to that, but Just something to be aware of at minimum.
I think I had 3 today, and people when they're doing a 10 by 20 shed or even a smaller shed, and you tell them they have to get 3 surveys, they're not happy. And I know that maybe you need 1 survey. I don't know what the answer is. In some cases you probably should, but it's just a lot to ask people.
Would staff like to work on an update and bring it to council?
Yeah, we'd be happy to bring the issue up to the planning board if the council would like for us to look into it. But
If it makes y'all's lives easier.
we'll explore with the planning board what the options might be for modifying that standard for the application while still ensuring, I think, that people are following the requirements of the ordinance, and maybe having that retained as an ability when something is kind of a marginal call might be good. But we'll explore that with the planning board and make a recommendation of some sort back to the council.
Okay, with y'all, council?
Vaughn, one question. You talked about the 160 updates.
Yep.
What's the deadline on that?
July 1.
July 1, okay.
What do you want to talk about next? Compton
Well, maybe just an update on CRTPO that are working on the new 2050 MTP, and there's going to be a call for submission of projects that are currently on the CTP, the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, are eligible for nomination to the MTP for prioritization. And I spoke with Bjorn at Union County just to kind of get a sense of what they were doing to see if anything might impact us. And I emailed you and Lori about that. We had a little bit of conversation back and forth. But the nomination should be open through the next council meeting. So if there are any projects that the council, from the CTP, that the council would like to nominate or voice some support to either the county or one of our neighbors about, then we could take that up at the February meeting if it was so desired.
These are projects that are already slated on the books, and we just want to.
Well, these are projects that are on the books from the perspective of they're included on the comprehensive transportation, in the comprehensive transportation plan. It's not just it's roads, pedestrian, rail, what have you, aviation, what have you. And so to be eligible for movement to the MTP and for prioritization requires to be on the CTP already. So if something's on there that you think is worthy of advancement for nomination and prioritization, then we'd be happy to look at it. I think the submission form can be fairly simple, but it has to be kind of an existing project of sorts. It's not something that has any kind of funding attached to it. It goes concept to the CTP, to the MTP, to the state transportation improvement program. So this would be moving it to the step before it might get funding within the next 8 years. If that makes sense. So we've made our first run through the survey. We'll have that to you before the end of January. It's currently 80 pages long. It's a very robust survey. And I will be making some refinements to that over the next week or so. And then as far as the comprehensive plan goes, you and I had some discussions about that in terms of the degree of public participation and input. And I think really the last phase would be for us to, for me to understand, what kind of documentation or proposal the council would like to see in support of what we might propose in terms of completing that. If you'd like a full on proposal or a more brief outline or what.
Okay, with brief outline. I think we were proposed enough otherwise.
Okay. missing something.
Well, do you guys have something?
The question that I have is on last month's code enforcement reports.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any more of that? All right.
Not the time for that. Is there anything that we can do to expedite the code enforcement violations at 1001 Mayflower? Is that right? Mayflower Trail?
So, George, you want to say?
So that we can go ahead and charge the various costs?
With what?
There's actually just recently some conversation about that today.
Yep.
Could you-
Yeah. I think we have a resolution that'll work, and I sent it to the lawyer for the homeowner for this afternoon after some emails with Cheryl and Vaughn. And Bonnie and Cheryl went out to the property right before Christmas, maybe a week before Christmas, maybe. So I think there's a resolution that will fix that, but I'll let folks know if the property owner objects. I don't know why they would, because it's pretty reasonable.
And then secondly, do we have next steps on the other two, or are we just waiting at this point?
Other two, the one I know of is
410 Cottonwood?
yeah, Cottonwood is a bit of a cluster, but it is in the midst of the property's in the midst of being transferred, and there's been discussions with transferred within the family, and there's been discussions with the lawyer that's closing it, and the trustee, and the child's wife. I think I can't promise that it's going to happen, but the alternative is we file for a judgment, and you end up having to collect. But we've been we think we have a resolution, but there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Let's put it that way.
But there is movement. I mean, it's not stagnant.
I would say lateral movement, maybe, meaning it's getting kind of passed side to side, but some movement, yes.
That answer all your questions? So, do I have a motion to approve the previous month planner and code enforcement report?
So motion.
Second.
All in favor? All right, so that brings us to our Union County Tax Administrator update.
Good evening. My name is Van Halen, I'm the tax administrator for Union County. I've got 2 months staff members with me tonight. Phil is our appraisal director, and Robin Mary is our assistant director. We're here to be as brief as possible, and then we exchange emails today. This is typically a 25, 30 minute thing, but we're going to try to boil it down and skip some things as fast as we can, so that we don't bore everyone to take an evening nap before we go to bed. But we're here to talk about a 2021 reappraisal. And Cheryl has the presentation on the start.
Sorry. Hold on.
If you'll click on the slideshow, menu item at the top. Let's see if it comes again. No parlay. There we go.
Thank you.
Just go through a couple of pages, slides here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. We'll start here. Already introduced the tonight. So there are three fundamental principles and policies and rules that kind of guide us as we go through the process. Number one is to be fair and equitable to taxpayers. All across the county, we want to make sure we're treating everybody the same so that we can't have one area say, well, you're taxing this lower because you're taxing them higher. We don't get involved in that discussion. We have guidelines and rules that we have to follow by the Department of Revenue, North Carolina General Statutes, and our industry best practices through IAA, which is we're a member of that organization, it's the International Association of Assessment Officers. And everything from those three concepts govern everything that we do in our office. So what is a reappraisal and why do we do it? Simply put, it's a systematic review of all appraisal of all of our properties in the county. We have to do this, we're required to do it by statute, a minimum of every 8 years. Union County historically has been between an 8-year and a 4-year cycle. It depends on the circumstances surrounding the reappraisal. We go to be in compliance with state statutes and existing case law. We do it to reestablish equity within the tax base. You'll see in a few slides, we're significantly out of line with the market right now. With our last reappraisal in 2015. When you hit certain thresholds related to the market, we're required by statute to do a mandatory reappraisal. It also ensures assessed values are reflective of the current market, which is our driving force behind the property tax values. And then we also have to do it to restore tax base with this loss equalization. We'll touch on that briefly in a few slides as well. So the timing of the reappraisal, there are 3 time periods that dictate when a reappraisal is performed and completed in any county in North Carolina. Number one, as I briefly mentioned already, is an 8-year minimum, or 8-year maximum time period between reappraisal cycles. The second one is a mandatory advancement of a reappraisal based on certain criteria. And the third one is when the Board of County Commissioners opts to advance to a more frequent reappraisal. More often than not, you see that happen on a 4-year cycle that they do that. In Union County, we did that in 2004 and 2008. We used the word trigger for the statutory mechanism that requires us to do this reappraisal. There's 3 criteria. If you are plus or minus 15% of the market based on the sales ratio studies that performed in the Department of Revenue, that is the first criteria. If you exceed that threshold, you check one box. The second criteria is based on the population of the county. And we check that box if we have more than 75,000 people in Union County. Back up the slide. So, right here. For us right now, we are sitting at a 70% sales assessment ratio, which means we're 30% under the market. That number is determined by the Department of Revenue. They sample sales throughout Union County and compare the assessed property tax value to the sales value of the property since 2015. This study is primarily based on 2019. The reappraisal is going to be primarily based on 2019 and 20 when we have enough sales data. But right now we are sitting at 30% of the market based on our information that we have in the office. What is the reappraisal timeline? This is not something that happens overnight. We started this process back in 2018. We received a notification in March of 2018 that we had to complete a reappraisal in 3 years. Of course, nobody saw a pandemic coming in 2018, so that's another element to this whole process that we have to deal with and navigate. In October 19, 2020, we submitted the proposed schedule of values to the Board of County Commission. There was a public hearing on that schedule of values. And November 2nd, the Board adopted the schedule on November 19th. The reappraisal took effect January 1st. We do not have all the values finalized yet. We're still in the process of the calculations. But that is the effective date of the appraisal. Sometime around February 15th, we're going to go back to the Board of County Commissioners with an update just to give them some new values and information related to the process and show them where we are now compared to where we were in 2020. Around the end of February, we anticipate the notices going out to individual property owners and updating value. That notice will start open an appeal with it. From that point, taxpayers have the opportunity to appeal to disagree with their value. We do anticipate getting appeals. If that happens even in good times, so we know we're going to get some now. The deadline for that to file appeals is when the Board of Equalization review, that's who hears the appeals locally, when they adjourn. Roughly around the end of May, we're projecting May 25th will be the window for the window closes for appeals for 2021. We just kind of gloss over this slide real quick. Reappraisal plan is developed with attention being paid to budget, staffing needs, outsourcing needs we have, hardware, software. We've recently gone through a full tax administration system implementation over the last 2 years, and then the time when it has to occur. So we develop our plan and submit to the government when we review all that information. You heard me mention the schedule of values. A uniform schedule of values is required to be developed for every reappraisal cycle. Currently, as I said earlier, we have been for the last 5 years evaluating property across the county based on the 2015 schedule of values. The schedule dictates the rates, the values for land, construction costs, materials, based on the market and the data we've gotten from the market in our studies in the office. We use data from over 34,000 qualified sales over the past 5 years to develop the schedule. Again, primarily focusing on 19 and 20 from the standpoint of the more recent sales are, the better quality data you're going to have. And it's designed to capture the value of the current real estate market. It is retrospective in nature. It is not predictive in nature from the standpoint of we're not trying to tell people this is where we think the market's going. This is based on sales that have occurred since the last appraisal. This is what the market is at this point in time. I need my bifocals. Methodology for doing this process. This is not the appraisal. You do not go out and look at a property and compare 2 properties or 3 properties to such as would happen in a mortgage transaction. This is a mass appraisal process. We have appraisal neighborhoods throughout the county, and we show you some data on that here in a few slides that allow us to compare like properties in homogeneous areas and value them similar to each other. So, common question that we're asked is, so you're telling me if I've got an acre and a 2,500 square foot brick home in Marshall, it's going to be the same value either way? No, it's not. Location is everything, and so that and the market will determine that, and that we adjust our values based on the market. We have ongoing quality assurance reviews. This is a process where we have staff that are working to review every property in Union County. It's an ongoing process. We've been field staff that's handled this for 7 years into this. We have 9 appraisers in our office. 8 or 9, 8.5 appraisers in our office that work full time. But with the new construction volume, we simply don't have the manpower or the time to visit every property every year. It's not feasible. But we do desktop reviews through aerial imagery. We visit the site when necessary, but to date we have physically inspected either through computer imagery or on-site inspection 63,000 parcels in Union County. Neighborhood delineation is the process that I was talking about of dividing the county up into appraisal neighborhoods. It may mean a subdivision, it may mean a group of subdivisions, depending on the density of the area. I've got a map here I'll show you in a few moments, but we've got roughly 900 appraisal neighborhoods across the county. You may have a subdivision, one I can think of, for example, Brandon Oaks here in Indian Trail. There may be 4 or 5 different appraisal neighborhoods within Brandon Oaks itself, and you may have a subdivision that stands on its own. So it varies based on the type of properties and construction that are in the area. Here's our county neighborhood map. Just to kind of give you an example, this is a static picture, so you can't really zoom in. But if you look at the eastern side of the county, you'll see some large areas of a single pellet. That's a pretty homogeneous appraisal area. But if you go over toward where we are at in Wesley Chapel, and then over toward Weddington and Marvin, you see a lot of grayscale in that map there. If you can zoom in on that, you'll see hundreds of neighborhoods start to populate based on different colors in that neighborhood. They just overlap and blend in with each other to put this to scale.
I have a question. So the
No, so
Green out there, the nothing.
if you look in the bottom right corner, that area is maybe a single appraisal neighborhood with a few smaller ones in the middle. There's some gray there, but if you look to the far left on the west side of the county, you see a lot of gray, and that just simply means there's a number of neighborhoods in that area, and the map couldn't populate all based on the level of the map.
But a color is unique to an appraisal neighborhood?
Yes, yes,
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
yes. A few slides ago, you heard me mention the question of equity. I'm making sure the number one, properties are assessed equitably compared to other properties, like properties in the area. And also, just treating taxpayers fairly. There was a scenario we talked about, restore tax base loss equalization. This chart kind of shows you what this is, and I'm going to explain this very quickly. Real estate is the only part of our tax base that's not assessed annually. Personal property that you list in January is assessed annually. Public service companies that are assessed by the Department of Revenue, they just send us a lump sum value for those taxpayers. That's assessed every year. And motor vehicles are assessed every year when we register motor vehicle with DMV. Public service companies are a special class of property. For those, and this is where the sales ratio comes into play. If you drop below 90% in your sales ratio, you can see here in the trend for the public service companies, they went from 100% down to 83% the last 2 years. So we're only taxing them at 83% of their taxable value because sales ratio is beyond, in their case, 10% of market. They have statutory authorization from the General Assembly that once the sales ratio drops below that point, they get a tax break. And so and those are companies like Duke Energy, Union Power, CSX Railroad, some of they refer to them as system projects, transportation, electric grid systems, those type of taxpayers. So what a reappraisal does, it allows us to restore that tax base, bring our whole tax base back up to market, and that allows them to be taxed at 100% market. This slide here goes into the same information. You can go ahead and skip to the next one. So just to give you a snapshot of how that affects the county, I don't have the village's actual public service property numbers, but this is the county as a whole. 2017-18, we had $420 and $431 million respectively of value that we taxed for those taxpayers. In 2020, their value had gone up to $479 million, but we only taxed them at $397 million. So it cost the county from a revenue standpoint about just under $600,000 in tax. It's not a lot, but it is. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it is money in its tax dollars that other people bear the burden for because we have a tax base without the market. So here's the question that's on everybody's mind. What is the anticipated county impact? We are looking at right now, this has continued to trend upward since the latter part of December when we made this presentation to the board. At that time, our sales ratio was hovering around 74%. And it was fluctuating between 72 and 74. So we were expecting a 25 to 30% increase. Now we are solidly at a 30% increase. That is not per individual property. That is the county tax base as a whole. You may have some properties that may not go up 5 to 10%. I live 3 miles down the road. I know for a fact mine's going up 49%. So there's some property that's going to vary depending on where you're at and the sales price, sales prices in your appraisal neighborhood. But overall, the county tax base as a whole, we anticipate roughly a 30% increase. And that holds true both for residential and commercial properties as well. We anticipated not quite as much of an increase in commercial, but all the sales data that's continuing to come in shows that's still trending in the same direction. A separate schedule of values that's within this whole process is related to our present use value program. And this is where property owners are allowed to have their land taxed at its current use, not at its fair market value. So if a farmer has qualifying properties, meets all the qualifications, they can have their agricultural land taxed at a significantly lower rate than what market value is taxed at. Typically, that, as you see going through here, Union County, we have 191,000 acres in this program throughout the county, which is about 46% of our tax base. There's a scenario in the next slide. Sure. These rates are changing. And we do not determine these rates. These rates are determined by the Use Value, Present Use Value Advisory Board based in Raleigh. Our 2015 per acre rate for valuation of agriculture, which is our biggest group in this category, is $385 per acre. The rate that's going to in 2021 is $420 per acre. If you play out that rate changes with the scenario in the slide, it's roughly a 90% tax rate for the farm, which is great. I mean, they've got the land in production, they're able to keep it there, and we all know the benefit of that provides to the economy. So if the taxpayer does not agree with their value, how do they appeal? There's 5 stages to the appeals process. Number 1 is just simply an informal review. They get their notice, they call Rob and say, hey, I think you guys are crazy. I think my house is not worth this much of this. You can come by today. We hear that every day. But we'll talk with the taxpayer and work with them and come up with an agreeable value. Hopefully, if that doesn't work, which the vast majority of the appeals are handled and settled at that point in the process. The Board of Equalization and Review, which is appointed by the Board of County Commissioners, they sit to hear all tax appeals in the county by statute. Anything that's not settled at the informal level is handled with the Board of Equalization and Review. Occasionally, I think we've had 3 in the past 4 years, they go to the Property Tax Commission, which is in Raleigh. You do not need legal representation to file an appeal at our level or the Property Tax Commission. There are some exceptions to that, but the typical house owner, property owner, taxpayer can go to Raleigh and represent themselves if we can't settle it here locally. Beyond that, you're allowed to go to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court if necessary, if it's a legal argument. The Property Tax Commission is the last step in evaluation decision. We do have a number of tax relief programs that we want to make people aware of. Our biggest program in the county, this is the area that Rob wants to see, part of the office, is our Elderly and Disabled Exclusion Program. And that excludes $25,000 for 50% of the value, which is greater if you meet qualifications. There are income and age restrictions. And then for 2020, if the income was in excess of $31,500, you did not qualify. So it's based on the sliding scale. There's typically a 2% increase in that every year. We also have the Disabled Veterans Program, which this is a flat exclusion of $45,000 if they qualify based on the documentation they received from the VA. Circuit Breaker Program is similar to the Elderly and Disabled exclusion. It's based on income, but it's not an exclusion. It's actually a tax deferment. We have 2 properties in the county that take advantage of this, and they're in and out of the program. It creates a lien on the property, and when that person dies or decides to come out of the program and sells the property, whoever buys the property or their heirs is responsible to pay that deferred tax bill. Our present use value, which we've already touched on, then we have our typical tax exemption programs for charitable, religious, educational, governmental properties. And again, with all these programs, ownership in these requirements must be met. So our communications plan for this, we've set up a dedicated 2021 reappraisal webpage. There's actually a 3-minute video I would encourage you to go watch. It's myself, Robin and Phil, and the county manager. We shot the video just down the street here in one of the subdivisions being built. It just gives an overview of the process. It's a good thing you can link to on Bill's website if you feel the need to help get the word out. We reach out with interviews on local radio stations and newspapers, just trying to make sure we're making people aware of the county's utilizing heavily the social media platforms for the county to push that information out there. Town hall meetings, much like tonight, this is our 5th out of 14. So we've got a busy schedule ahead of us the next few weeks to just get the word out and to make sure. We don't want anyone to say, we didn't know you were doing this. With the effort we're putting into this, if that's the case, then they didn't pay attention. And we are putting the word out there and meeting various groups around the county. Just to give you an idea of our tax base for the county for 2020, roughly a bottom line taxable tax base in the county of $27.8 billion. We have annual growth rate is roughly 3%, and that's held true since 2013 when the recovery really started to begin for our area. Again, part of the tax base here to show you what it looks like. I don't think anybody in the room has been around Union County for a while. I don't think this is new to you. We are a heavily residential county. If you look at the tax base as a whole, I think it's a 72, 73% residential. If you look at it just in the scope of real estate, it's 88%. You have your personal property and commercial and industrial makes up the other 10% of that tax base. Again, just to highlight some statistics here. And these go back to, these are annual averages going back to 2013. We're adding about 1,700 new parcels per year in the county. Residential growth makes up the majority of that, almost all of it. As far as new residences being built, both with existing lots and new lots, is about 1,700 to 1,800 homes per year being built throughout the county. Our residential sales, we're averaging just right around 6,300 per year. We have a very active real estate market, and it has been that way since 2013. It's not at the level that we were in 2004, 2008, and even slightly prior to that, but it's a steady, we don't have the peaks, but it's a steady, consistent number throughout. Our commercial industrial growth is significantly smaller. We're averaging about 60 new projects a year, or commercial buildings a year going into the county. Next few slides will show you, and we'll hit this very quickly, our sales assessment ratio history. This goes back to, I think, that first year in 1986. It shows you every reappraisal cycle going back to that time. You can see, we talked about a 30 to 32% increase this year. That is not unheard of in the county. If you go back to some of the older reappraisal cycles, you're looking at 50 to 60% in some of those years. Moving forward to 2000, go back to the last slide. If you look at the 2000 to 2004, 2008 reappraisals, you can see that increase was only about 12% per year, 12 to 15% per year. But that was because we were doing it every 4 years. And the county was growing like Union County, a more consistent reappraisal cycle than what we dealt with the last two cycles. We also see where the economic crash happened in 2008, 2009. We actually inverted the cycle in 2010. We had 119% of the sales ratio. So we triggered on that side of it last time, on the bottom side of it this time. And we are actually the only county in the state that's ever triggered the statute. So, and this kind of just to zoom in to the more recent years, including 2020. I think the last number up there is 75%, 74%, but it has dropped since then. This presidential was originally done in October. So in conclusion, here are our high points, and this is what we want to make sure everybody's aware of. We're a transparent office. All of our information is public record, with very few exceptions, and that's personally identifiable information. We're able to come talk to us and see us and see what we do with our information. The schedule of values is available for people to look at. It's in our office, it's in the county clerk's office, and we live and die by every in our office. Everybody may not like the answer they get if they call the office, but they can guarantee that it's based in statute and based in the policy and guidelines that we have to follow. It's a customer-focused process. We look at this as a partnership. We may have a value in your property. We may not have something about your property that's correct. If we're wrong, let us know to fix it, and we'll work that out. Our public information campaign, more meetings, and we have some in the past several weeks, much like we're doing tonight, and then utilization of technology. We will be launching an online appeals module. We are implementing that software now, so that people have electronic access to our office, and we'll go to an appraiser that's responsible for their area, and they'll have one-on-one contact with that appraiser as soon as that appraiser will get to them. That's our process. That's what we have to offer. If you have any questions, I'm glad to answer them. I'm in the field as well. And I know it's a lot of information. We tried to shorten it for you, but we feel like it's very important, especially in the economy that we're dealing with right now. I mean, the economy seems to be helping from a real estate standpoint, but we know there's people out there struggling. And especially with the pandemic and everything that's going on, we're fully aware of the situation we're dealing with this in. So.
Yeah, I think the last statement there hit the nail right on the head. The fact that this is going through, there's a lot of people struggling with the pandemic is not going to go over well. And I'm trying to tell them, not telling you anything you don't already know. Now, you're a local?
Yes.
You're a county employee?
Yes.
And all your staff is as well. Okay. You said the last assessment was done in 2015, but has a maximum of every 8 years. Are we in the middle of a reassessment now, or?
The reassessment is happening right now. So, the difference between this and the 8-year mark is that trigger mechanism because we are at 70% of the sales ratio. We're 30% on the market. If we hit that 15% point, that's when we have to, we're notified by the state, you have to do this, and that way we can do that.
When do you expect to have the reassessment completed by?
We have to have notices in the mail out in February.
Okay. That was one of my follow-up questions was how will the residents be notified, and they're going to be notified by mail in February. Because I sit up here, I get stopped at the grocery store a lot of times and ask questions that don't pertain to me at all. They talk to me and they say, we got a problem with the roads. I said, well, that's the Department of Transportation. They said, we got a problem with school. Well, that's the Board of Education. Now they're talking about we're going to be putting a notice on their door that the taxes are going up. I don't want an angry mob coming at me. You're going to raise their taxes. I want them coming after you. Because everybody thinks just because you're an elected official, you're the government and it's your fault. And we need to make sure that how we advertise this is done so that people know that it's not those who must the child raising their taxes. It's the Union County. You mentioned in your presentation that there's going to be an annual growth rate of 3%.
That's what the average that we've had since 2013. It's been around 3% per year.
I think a lot of people are going to have a problem swallowing a 30% increase in their property taxes.
Okay.
I know you have the data to back it up, but that's a big pill to swallow.
Okay, let me make a clarification for you. This is not a 30% increase in property taxes, and you don't change your tax rate for the village. This is an increase in value. By statute, you have to publish a revenue neutral tax rate, which means the town does not, or the village does not generate any more revenue this year than they did last year, even with the new value. So most jurisdictions in the county will have a declining tax rate. So the actual taxes that you pay will not be a 30% increase unless there's a jurisdiction that doesn't drop their tax rate.
Okay. It's still going to be an eye-opening experience to, I'm sure, a lot of residents. And how is this physically done? Is it door-to-door? Is it, like you said, you look on an aerial photo? How is it physically assessed?
So there's a number of tools that we use. We have aerial imagery. We do have some boots on the ground. I mean, we can't visit every property every year. And that's part of the quality assurance process that I was touching on. We have physically inspected 63,500 properties over the last 7 years. There's over 100,000 properties in the county. It's a mass appraisal process. There's a lot of statistical analysis that goes into it based on the sales data, and we look at the type of house, the location, school districts. There's a whole multitude of criteria that go into that process. And details specifically to that because that is his area of the office.
Now, is this going to be primarily on private residence or will corporate property be assessed?
That's a piece of property in the county.
So corporate as well?
Yes.
Okay. And it's always going to go up. It's never going to go down. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
It's always going to go up. It's never going to go down.
In 2015, we had a 10% reduction in the tax base. So that's coming off the recession, but we had not attained the market level that we were at in 2008 at the last reappraisal. There was a 10% reduction in the tax base in 2015.
One of the things that we had a meeting last Tuesday about the 2050 comp plan, where the committee was basically asking both the county and the municipalities to kind of pump the brakes on development because of problems with infrastructure. Is that being factored in, or is this, ask a different way, is the increase going to be to take care of what we already have or what we're expecting to have in the future?
I can't speak for that. Those are policy decisions that are outside of the purview of the tax office. Our job is to ensure that properties within the county are assessed based on the market. And that's what this process is all about. It's not about growth. It's not about, yes, those things impact it because the real estate market continues to grow in the county. And it will have an impact. If it slows down, there's a supply and demand factor there. So that could see an increase in prices from that point, depending on, there's a lot of variables that are outside of our purview that do impact this, but we have no control over those variables.
Any further questions for me?
I have a question. I just want to see if I follow this correctly. It's supposed to be done every 8 years. The last time it was done was 5 years ago. Is that correct? Okay. There's a 30% increase in valuation, but that doesn't affect taxes. Is that what you said?
No, that's not what I'm saying. The value is going to go up. The amount of taxes you pay depend on the tax rate that is set on the jurisdiction that the property is located in. So if Wesley Chapel Home Revenue Neutral increases their rate, your taxes may go up nominally, very minimal, or they may go down. It depends on the rate that's adopted on the board. The tax office is not determining tax rate.
I see.
It's part of the annual budget process that the towns and the counties have to go through.
It seems like a 30% increase in valuation would almost certainly mean the tax would go up. But, okay. I'm just wondering, though, if it can wait 3 more years legally, and it's being done at the 5-year point in the middle of COVID with a lot of people taking a huge hit in their incomes, is that really good timing?
Legally, it cannot wait 3 more years. That's part of the process where we hit some trigger points that are required by statute, require us to do this now. We were notified in 2018 that you have to complete this within 3 years. This is that 3-year mark. Because we're at 70% of the market. If we were above 85%, we wouldn't be doing this now. The board wouldn't advance it.
At 70% of the market, I'm sorry, would you mind explaining?
So if your house, just to break this down, if your house is appraised at $100,000, right now, today, based on 2015, we may have it at $70,000. So that means because your current values for tax purposes are based on 5-year-old values. But today, your house is going to be worth more than that. And so that's where that ratio is determined by the state that dictates when we have to do this reappraisal.
Just one more, and it's more so for us than anyone else. To Mike's point, the further ahead we can get with public notice about this, the better off we are. Cheryl, can we get a link to the reappraisal webpage on our website?
I already made a note to do that.
Okay.
Maybe you can send it out on the sunshine list. I hate when residents get shocked by something in their mailbox and then they immediately panic and call us. I'd like to let them know what's coming in advance.
Well, I'm seeing some of your stuff on Facebook.
And that's why we're doing this. We want to get the word out. I mean, we're not trying to hide anything. Like I said, we're transparent. We're putting everything out there. The schedule of values is online. It's got rates that help go into developing the values that go on properties. It's got appraisal neighborhoods. I mean, the whole process is transparent.
From a planning board perspective, in our pending comp plan, I think you might be able to utilize this as a good metric to see how we've been doing since 2015. Because a lot of things we do, right, is preserve our home values, at least on the planning board side, right? I mean, so what ordinances do we adopt? What zoning do we do? What subdivisions do we allow in? A lot of things we do is one of the goals, right, is to maintain the values of the people's homes here in Wesley Chapel. So I'm wondering, as a metric in 2015, how our valuation of Wesley Chapel compares to some of the neighboring. If it's on par, it's pretty good, right? If our valuation is going up 40% and our neighbors are only going up 20%, we must be doing something good these last 5 years for it to raise that high. So I'm interested to find out, as a metric, retrospectively look back, how we've been doing the right thing to preserve or increase home values. I mean, it's a trade-off, right? I mean, you want us to do good, increase your home value, but here we come to the crux of it. Now we got to pay taxes on that increase. At least that's how I see it.
John,
And we never roll that into the company.
you also have the unique perspective of being a large landowner. For yourself, I like your perspective on this from versus me. I live in a residential neighborhood. I live on less than an acre. How that's going to affect me versus how the farm exemption or the large landowner with acres and acres of property, how that's going to be compared.
I think it depends on, again, for those tax programs, they've got to qualify. So you can own 100 acres, but if you don't have it in farm or ag production or forestry land, then you're not going to get tax break on that. So again, we have to look at all those variables. The applications have to be made, and we have to review the income from the property along with the use and make sure they have to meet the minimum acreage. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. If that's what you're asking.
It's funny you mentioned that, apples. You have to show income on the property. But if you're going to plant an orchard or, prepare, you won't see income for 5 to 10 years unless you have, a crop that you harvest, every year. So it's unfortunate because, you don't get that benefit unless you've already done 10 years of preparing, working your farm, get ready, and then start seeing income. Then you have to show some years worth of income. Right? So property owners like myself are trying to do orchards or, vineyards or different types of crops. We won't see income for 5 to 10, 15 years in some instances. So we can't qualify for that.
Thank you, ma'am. We really appreciate you.
And Cheryl, if you need any information, if you want me to send you the direct links, I can do that.
Okay, that'd be great.
If you don't need anything else,
And usually we do get information about, what percentage Wesley Chapel tax values went up compared to Indian Trail, compared to Weddington or whatever. That'll start coming out.
once we get everything finalized, we'll be able to send that data out. That won't be a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
All right, so that leads us to our public hearing on the Floyd Farms Conservation Subdivision request for subdivision modification to exceed lot length. So I guess I first, do you want to speak before the public hearing?
I think we probably need to go ahead and swear people in.
So if you were speaking for the Floyd Farms Conservation Subdivision request to exceed lot length, we need to swear you in.
Do you want me to swear him in? Can I do it?
Anybody that's planning on speaking at all on the subdivision modification.
Even if you're a resident who's speaking during the public hearing, you have to be sworn in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth?
Yes.
Let me get your names too. Could you just say your name while I'm over here?
Yeah.
My name is He Nguyen,
Can you spell?
HYNGUYEN.
What were the last two?
That's
I-E-N?
H is the first name, and
Okay.
Nguyen is the last name.
Thank you. And the next person?
James McGiver. And it's MCGI, V as in Victor, ERN.
Thank you.
Dean Harold, AJ Farquhar, Dean Philco.
Thank you.
And now I need to open the public hearing. Public hearing started.
All right. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of this matter before, I guess we would have the applicant speak on their behalf. So, Mills Ventures LLC has submitted an application for subdivision modification standards of section 155.073B of the subdivision ordinance regarding maximum block length. This is in the proposed 42 lot single family residential subdivision located at 4108 Wesley Chapel Road. Near the intersection of Wesley Chapel and Potter Road. This is one of 3 required approvals that this particular subdivision would need to get the subdivision modification. There will be a separate condition for conservation subdivision assuming that if they were successful in receiving the modification and the conservation subdivision, then it would go to the preliminary plat process subsequent to this. So the subdivision received administrative approval of the sketch plan on July 29th. And at the time, I was not here personally, but from the records of the previous planner, we understood that the applicant understood that in a future submission they would be required to get a modification for the maximum block length. Currently, that standard is 1,500 feet. The modification, as stated by the applicant, would be necessary due to the proposed location of a stub street going to adjoining property. We require internal connectivity to adjacent properties, and he can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it's my understanding that during the discussion about the sketch plan, that the location of the proposed substrate here, in order to line it up with clean Grant Way, would exceed that maximum block. Because that's about a 2,000 foot. So 500 foot deviation in maximum block. And so tonight we're holding a quasi-judicial public hearing on the question of approval of modification of the maximum block length of the proposed subdivision. This is an evidentiary hearing. The applicant, just as any evidentiary hearing, has to submit sufficient copies of evidence to show that the proposed modification meets required findings. The village council must affirmatively find if the modification is approved. At the conclusion of the hearing, the council will be able to deliberate on the question of the approval of the modification. Specifically, there are 5 findings that are required to be shown affirmatively. Those being that there are special circumstances or conditions affecting the property, such as strict application of provisions of this chapter, meaning subdivision ordinance would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of the land. The modification is necessary for preservation and enjoyment of substantial property right of the petitioner. The circumstances giving rise to the need for the modification are peculiar to the parcel and are not merely characteristic of other parcels in the jurisdiction of this chapter. The granting of the modification will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare, or injurious to other property in the territory in which the property is situated. And the modification will not vary the provisions of Chapter 156I of the zoning ordinance applicable to this property. So those are the standards that they have to meet, and I guess it would be time for the applicant to make their presentation about the need for the subdivision modification, and after that, anybody else that wanted to speak.
Paul, can I clarify that you've notified, or the proper notifications have been given to all the neighborhood residents?
Yes, notifications were sent for Cheryl mailed them. I prepared the mail notice. They were sent. Cheryl prepared, I think both prepared and published the newspaper notice, and Cheryl also placed the sign.
December 30th, we mailed them.
On the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. Thank you, Lon, for a very thoughtful report. I understand that we have a full agenda tonight, so I didn't want to repeat what Van has already shared. But if you guys allow us to make a quick introduction for our team, if you're okay with that, we have Mr. Dean Harrell and Colton Harrell, who represent Mills Venture LLC, who is the developer from White Farm. Myself is Hee Nguyen. We represent DPR Associates. We also have James McGibbon, one of our team members. We also have our attorney, Mr. Girish Patel, with JMB Law. However, he cannot be here tonight because his son is sick and waiting to be tested. And out of abundant caution, he's self-quarantined. Again, without repeating what Vaughn has already shared, this color rendering that we have on the lot scale, I'd just like to share the 11 by 17 version for you if that's okay. I should be lit one, but yes. Just pass that on. You think you may have one.
Thank you.
So we are here tonight for two components. First is the subdivision modification, and the second is a special use permit for the conservation district. And they go hand in hand. And the reason why I like to share this rendering is for you to really show the reason why we decide the location for the Stud Street, because based on the site constraints, the adjacent properties, land use, and the future connectivity to Kings Grant Way, we feel the location proposed is like the best location possible for the site. And we believe that instead of having one Stud Street instead of potentially two, would result in less traffic for both the proposed McCoy Farm development and the adjacent properties. So with that, we are here if you guys have any questions.
Well, I know we already clarified that you said you notified the adjacent property owners. Does that include all the people on Kings Grant Way who currently live on a dead-end street?
No.
So adjacent property owners, but not the Kings Grant Way residents, residents that live on that street.
The residents who are not adjacent, nobody that is not an adjacent property owner receives no notice.
Okay.
I'm not aware. They may have seen the sign or seen it in the paper, but they did not. They were not supposed to know.
And then the sub road is a requirement of our own zoning ordinance.
In a number of different ways, especially, including relating to the maximum block length. One could not have blocks without having, in this type of subdivision, without having a stub.
Questions? Or do we have anyone else who needs to be sworn in to speak tonight regarding the stub road or the subdivision modification?
We're good if you have any question for us, either me or Dean can answer. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Lori.
I just have a question. What action would it take to end up having that connection to Kings Grant Way? Would it be the property in between them?
If the property owners in between, particularly if those two existing parcels were sold to someone looking to develop land there, build houses, most likely, then it's possible that they would be required, if they maybe built, some lots, maybe if they were building lots like this and this, then they would proceed to build a public street through them. It's speculation, but that would probably be the most likely scenario in which that road was extended. I doubt there's probably not a lot of demand on behalf of the village itself to do it, and absent that, there probably wouldn't be really any other force out there that wanted to do it.
So I have a question on the plans that you've shown us here. You've got one lot, which is lot number 43. It looks like part of that is in a protected floodplain.
Well, hold on, we're only talking about the subdivision modification for the stub road right now.
Okay.
The maximum block length at this point.
So,
And that would be something I'll be more than happy to share on when we go through the CCUB.
So any other questions about the subdivision modification to the block?
I'm just not happy that the residents of Kings Grant Way were notified specifically on this. Well, I know it's not a legal requirement, but I think it would be a kind of courtesy, given that this could directly affect the traffic flow through the neighborhood and specifically past the homes.
It could possibly, it could not possibly.
But I agree. I would have rather erred on the side of caution.
Yeah, if you might, I share. So part of the subdivision layout or any creating a new neighborhood street connectivity is one of the key elements in any jurisdiction that we are in. So we are subject to provide a stub street. Again, we look at the surrounding neighborhood and we felt Kings Grant Way would be an ideal future connectivity. But, that will not happen unless future development coming in. If a developer come in and buy our office lots and turn into a subdivision, that's when they would make this connectivity. And I believe that's when its Kings Grant neighbors, property owner, would be subject to, notify of such.
It's actually unlikely that they would, unless a rezoning was needed or some other type of action took place. It's not necessarily for certain that they would receive any mail or direct notification. If the property were just subdivided, then.
So if you're basically saying if you buy a lot on a stub road, you accept the chance.
I'm not, people knowing about what's going on, great. Just procedurally, if this particular subdivision did not require the conditional use permit or the subdivision modifications, then we wouldn't be mailing notices to anyone.
But to your point, if you buy a house on a stub street compared to a cul-de-sac, there could be some expectation, something that you don't know about could happen.
Yeah, just speaking generally, the street ends at a dead end into vacant land, and you take your chances.
Could the village say we don't want a stub road?
The village could say that. The proposed, the council's action in granting the modification would be to grant a greater degree of relief from the requirements of the ordinance than has been applied for, and I will maybe defer to the attorney as to what to do with that.
It's difficult for me to comment just because I'm not intimately familiar with the application. I understand exactly what Vaughn just said. I guess the answer to your question is, I guess that's possible based on what I'm hearing, but not what was applied for. So it would be out. Council has discretion in dealing with something like a legislative subdivision modification, but it's not what was applied for and asked for.
And I know this is theoretical, okay? But if there's a road on one side and a stub road on the other side, at the point of that property possibly got sold and developed, would then there be any expectations that would fall back to us, the village, to say, hey, you've got a portion of the road here, you got a portion here, you guys help us out to marry these two?
We would
understand what I'm saying?
If we were approving a major subdivision, which they would require a road coming through there for any significant, more than a couple houses really being built out there, we would most likely require that road be extended the full way between the two.
Okay.
In the absence of some compelling reason not to. One of the issues at play here is that Union County, in my discussions with the fire marshal, or the folks at the Chapel Volunteer Fire Department, not the fire marshal office, but have not adopted Appendix D of the North Carolina Fire Code, which would essentially have prohibited the subdivision if it were in effect, due to fire apparatus access road standards. They wouldn't prohibit it, they would have to sprinkle if there were more than 30 houses, basically, due to not having multiple routes of access into the subdivision. And so from an emergency response standpoint, being encouraged more in more places to provide multiple means of access. You have issues where there's fire, flooding, other calamity occurs, and having additional routes of access into a neighborhood has been, enshrined, at least in an optional appendix of the fire code that's being adopted by more and more communities to do that. There is no numerical standard here, I believe, in Wesley Chapel for the number. You have to have one per X number of lots, but there are good reasons for it.
But stub roads can be stub roads forever.
They can be stub roads forever and ever. And the neighbors to the northeast there will have a very big role in determining whether or not it stays a stub road.
And was there consideration given to connecting out to Potter Road towards the end of the cul-de-sac as a connector?
I was not present for any of the discussions. I'll let P answer that question.
Right. There is quite a big creek and floodplain in the back of this cul-de-sac. So topography-wise, it would be very infeasible. And also, again, wetland, floodplain, pond. So this connection deemed not feasible when we've gone through the planning process with the previous planner, Robin Byers.
May I ask a question?
You have to be sworn in. You're welcome to, but you have to be sworn in.
Can you swear me?
Yes, sir. We asked earlier if anybody wanted to be sworn in.
I'm not kidding.
Raise your right hand for the record. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And your name?
William Milligan.
Thank you.
Yeah, and your address for the record?
4000 Wesley Chapel Road. We received a letter that did not receive a map. And so I don't know exactly where the road is going to come in relation to my property.
Is your property on the map, sir?
Sir?
Can you point to your property?
Yes, sir. It's, I don't know which one of these.
This is Wesley Chapel.
Okay.
This is here.
This is my property, right?
This is yours. Okay, this is yours. Okay. And your question again, sir?
Yeah, how is that going to affect my property?
It does not. The future Stub Street is down here. So we will not have any Stub Street or future connectivity that potentially will go to your side.
What is this?
This is the existing overhead power line with the easement, so we just leave that easement.
Right, that crosses my property.
It's might. I don't have the information. It's go beyond our property, but I understand that it's go like that, so we keep maintain the same easements.
Okay. So that existing line will be there as it is.
Yes, exactly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm just curious, is the property owner right here tonight?
I'm here.
Do you want to speak in and say, you want to be sworn in and say anything about your stuff?
Raise your right hand and put your left hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you. And your name?
Deborah Deacon,
And your address?
3900 Wesley Chapel.
Can you roughly point to where you're looking on the map?
Yeah, so. Oh, wait a second.
You're
Right.
there with this one.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It just looks different.
Could you move?
Yeah, so didn't you just have the stub road that's there?
Our proposed Stub Road
Yeah, it's
location.
there. But it changed to here?
No, ma'am, it's the same location.
Yeah.
This is just the overhead power.
So I'm just wondering, you folks seem to be pretty confident that I'll be selling my property.
No, we don't want to speculate. It's just from the land planning perspective, street connectivity is one of the key elements that we always have to subject to.
I was just wondering because this doesn't have anything on it. I mean, you know, as an concession to the neighbors, maybe it'd be nice if you could connect up this way more.
Right. So right now, the way we align this is the center line of this road is that follow this property line.
I know. I'm very familiar with that property line.
Yeah. So you asking if we can shift this one up a little bit so it's more of this vacant land?
Or on this property line.
Right. The reason why that we chose not to do it here because as you see the future connectivity is not there. Right? See the King Street is right here. It's very it's logical. But over here they would have to build another street, which again there's nothing. So that's if to answer your question, it is possible when we get into the CDs to shift the street north maybe 10, 20 feet so that this entire right-of-way future potential could never happen. Align more of this side of the property.
It could take some surveying work to figure out minimum lot widths.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So you could have to shift an entire lot, which would make it move not 10 or 20 feet, but 120 feet maybe.
So because you've got this kind of straddling, I'm sorry. You have this sort of straddling property line.
Yes.
Now, what would happen to my property if these folks decided to sell and you just kind of scooted it over just on the other side of the property line? Kind of bad for me.
Would it be what for you?
It would be kind of bad for me if you scooted it just over there. All of a sudden, it'd be a road right next to my house.
We remember the stub street is actually a courtesy to the adjoining neighbors. The stub isn't helping us in this project in particular at all. And so what it allows the neighbors to do is have potential.
Which neighbors?
Anyone that is in that surrounding area. So any subdivision, we offer the stub street as potential access for the surrounding neighbors to maybe do what they need. So if that were to occur, if someone wanted to develop your neighbor, you would be heavily involved in the process because you would be literally adjoining it. And then that's where your concerns come in. But us just putting the stub street is a requirement so that the neighbors may do something. If they do it, then again it's through the whole process and everyone will be considering the effect on your property. At this point, the stub street is not really intending to encourage anything.
Let me make a note on the street straddling, the stub street straddling the property line, splitting it evenly, is the village would not allow your neighbor to the northwest to construct half the street. Right? And so
What do you mean half the street?
They wouldn't be able to just build half the street. And so if they were
What do you mean half the street? Like one lane instead of two? Or what?
Yeah, who knows? And so necessarily if the street is split down the middle of your two, a future street would be split down the middle of your two properties, then it would be more difficult for the adjoining property owner to potentially develop the property without some input from you directly in terms of selling them some land or some other kind of concession or interaction with them. And so having it only on the neighbor's property could impact not you, somebody down the road. It could lessen the value. I'm not advocating for or against this, but I'm just, trying to raise a scenario whereby splitting the difference between two properties encourages a greater degree of future cooperation between neighbors rather than one person doing something without the input or advice or counsel of the other.
Right. Again, our intent is to make sure we meet the village ordinance and intent. And that intent is street connectivity. So therefore, we provide the stub street. And from the land planning and site engineering perspective, this location, in our opinion, working with the town planner over in a year, is the best feasible location. Let's say if we have our neighbor here show up and ask the same question that you asked. So does it mean that, if I put it to your land, not your land, if I put it to this side, then our neighbor here will have a different opinion. If I put it on to this side, then you have a different opinion. So again, our job, our intent is not about the future development. This is completely outside our control and it's not in our interest. That land, this Stub Street could stay here for the next 100 years. We just don't know. But again, for the intent to meet the village ordinance and the street connectivity, this location, based on our land planning and site engineering, is the most feasible location.
And so the village of Wesley Chapel requires you to have a stub road somewhere around here.
Yes, ma'am. The block
just
lane.
In case.
Right. And so that road will not be extended through your property without your permission.
Oh, of course not.
I guarantee
Believe
that.
me. But still.
But it could be, if it was only on your neighbor's property, it could be extended through your neighbor's property with zero input from you whatsoever.
Right.
Which is,
Right. I mean, why is a stub road required? If it wouldn't necessarily, first of all, it wouldn't be used now. But why would it be required eventually? Why wouldn't there be enough ingress, egress otherwise?
Vaughn mentioned that from the public safety perspective of that fire emergency, the policemen, the firemen always would like to have more than one asset to get to the emergency cases.
What is this?
That
I
is-
didn't get a map either, so
Yeah.
what is that then?
This is just an existing power, overhead power.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's just a 30 feet easement. It's not a road, nothing. It's just an overhead power.
I was just going to say, if it's the wisdom of the council to where, as far as this petition, in this particular case, you don't want a stub road, it doesn't affect us anyway if we take it out.
Correct, yes. It doesn't hurt us at all if we take it out. If the
It
village
can be a
decides-
modification recommended by council if you so wish.
Thank you.
Did you like that?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Or if you'd like one before you leave,
I would,
we'll make sure, we'll get you one.
So right now, the fire department can't force us to have them.
No.
No, the county fire marshal would be who would have some input into that if Union County had adopted Appendix B. The town can adopt Appendix B on its own. But it was something when I first spoke with one of the guys down at the fire department here, I inquired as to whether the county adopted. He said that they had not. And so there's nobody, the county or anybody else isn't going to force the village to do this.
Like, this is just a comment from me, I understand, the people in Kings Grant Way, they bought their houses knowing that they were separate. So they started that house. I do have a bit more of a soft spot for people who don't want to get separate. I personally live in the neighborhood, we only have one entrance. And we're a little bit larger than them. Doesn't seem to be a problem. I do understand the public safety concern. Just a comment.
Well, do we have to make a decision on this evening, legally?
You do not have to make a decision on it this evening. I would imagine there'd be some reasonable time within which one would need to be made to guarantee their.
And what was the recommendation of the planning board?
They were in favor. The minutes reflect that there was a favorable outcome of the planning board meeting. Their recommendation does notice.
To me, I think you have two options. You have the option to approve the subdivision modification to exceed this lot line, or do you approve it and take out the stub road?
But what's the block length without the stub road? I thought the block length was exceeded in order to accommodate the stub road.
That's, the stub road is being accommodated in the particular location by the modification. If it were not being accommodated, it would be somewhere around here.
So if we took out the stub road, we would make a modification.
They would probably need a modification from the same standard at a minimum.
Maybe lower than the minimum.
I'm sorry?
You say maybe less than the minimum block length?
They would exceed. The minimum block length standard would be exceeded by over twice the amount, because they would have a block of approximately 3,400 feet. Is that right? From here to here, without intervening even potential future access point. And you can modify any provision of your ordinance as long as there's a reason to do so. You can determine what those reasons are.
I think the question on the table is whether we approve the modified block length. I sense that there's probably more conversations to take place on if there is or if there isn't a stub road.
Okay.
But I think that's probably for a later date. Well, am I wrong? We're just at this point asking to modify the block length?
I would think that and I will let the applicant speak for themselves, but the modification of the block length guarantees at this point that the subdivision of the property could take place in a manner that's consistent with the sketch plan that the village approved back in July.
That would be moved if we choose to forego the stub out road altogether.
No, we would still have to vote on whether we approve to modify the block length, because at that point, as you said, the block length is not 2,000, it's going to be longer. So I think this gives both the applicant, the adjoining landowners, give us time to determine whether a stub road is needed. But again, at some point, we're going to have to say yes. Either we're going from 2,000 to 3,000, whether there is or is not a stub road.
I think another comment that needs to be made, since the property owner of this property is here. So this stub road basically goes right between the property lines. This cannot happen without agreement of both property owners. So you don't have to agree when that connectivity is proposed upon us to go through. They will have to come to you and deal with you on your property line. So just want to make sure we understand that both property owners would have to engage to say yes. So you'll be disclosed. It will be disclosed to you as well. I think this is owned by Mr. Singh. So that gives you a little bit of a surety that it's just not going to come through. You will have some say-so, as mentioned before. So all in all, as far as land planning and engineering, this is the ideal spot for both property owners to come together for this thing in the future. So I don't want to weigh on, as he was trying to explain, I don't want to weigh on, we're just going to stick it to this property owner's plan or stick it through this one. It all has to be a consensus.
And both both property owners currently have access, direct access to Wesley Chapel Road, and the Kings Grant Way does not go to our guest here tonight's property. There's an intervening piece of land. So there are a number of factors at play there. It's the assumption we have to planning and speculating about the future development in the area. We assume that if both property owners in here, or maybe just if both were so inclined to sell their land at some point, hopefully very, very far in the future, that this would make the most appropriate connection because it's the most direct.
And that Northwest Key, she said, has access to Wesley.
This property goes actually out like this.
Is that little point piece out there?
It's actually a little bit. It's actually bigger than that.
Is it? Yeah.
If the Union County GIS is correct, I cannot speculate as to how correct it is.
Yes, ma'am.
I have another question. So, am I to assume that that stub road would only be connected to Kings Grant Way if I and the neighboring property owner agreed? It would have to be straddling the property line? You couldn't just ask the adjoining property owner to put it all on his side, in which case I only gain a few feet.
It would be difficult to do it.
Well, difficult, or am I going to get an assurance? Because right now I'm not going
Well,
to
can't assure anything, but the likelihood of this road being extended as it lies now.
And we actually don't have the property line showing up here because we only use the survey for our property only, and your property show up at the GIS information. So we don't know how accurate the GIS information show up.
Yeah, but the fact remains, would it straddle the property line, or could the road be built just on the next guy's property, which is only a few feet away further from my house than it would be if it straddled?
If it truly straddles the property line, then it would be very difficult to turn the road enough in that short length to meet the village's requirements for curvature standard on a road. We can't put sharp turns into the road.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be a very sharp turn. I would just like to know where it stubs into. If it stubs into straddling the line, it wouldn't be a very sharp turn to go a few feet over here into the adjoining property. That wouldn't be a sharp turn.
Yes, that would be a very sharp turn, and based on the engineering standards, like Vaughn said, the curvature, the tension, and then you have to turn, you have to put a horizontal curve. I think it will be very hard to be able to turn and completely stay on this property.
It's only a few feet if it's straddling the property line. And the stub doesn't go all the way to the edge of the property there anyway, so you've got a few feet on the proposed development's side of the property to make it part of the turn.
So is your concern is...
I think I put it.
I think the alignment of the road is going and hits the other property line as accurately as we can see. So if it's off by a few feet, they're not going to be able to turn the road before that property line. Like this, this is the actual. Here's the stub, and that center line is actually in our engineering plans goes further. We just don't stop at the property. So that'll be recorded. So they're not going to get a turn to this person's property line, the whole road.
I'm not concerned about this guy's property. I'm concerned about this one. I'm concerned about this property because that's where I live.
Here's you.
Yeah.
So there's no physical way you get this road over here, and that's in zero.
Hey James, if you don't mind, let's show it here so the public can see instead of showing. If you don't mind, feel free to come up here so we can, other folks can see it too.
Yeah, so when we submit the engineering plans, the center of this alignment is actually extended into the property line. And so they're not going to be able to turn a road inside the development. It would only possibly change once it hits your property. So there's no way you're not involved in the process.
So is your concern that you will not have a say when the street is done?
My concern is I don't want a street 100 feet from my house. You know, I don't have seven acres just so I can sell them on the street right next to my house.
Go ahead.
If I may, I think we're all saying the same thing, we'll beat the dead horse. She doesn't want the road. I don't want the road. You don't want to have to build the road. Let's just not put the road in and everybody's happy.
Yes.
The fire department doesn't want the road.
Yes, sir.
Get rid of the damn road.
Yes, sir. Yes, so
You
yes.
make that part of the conversation.
So the village council can make the modification to allow the block length to be 3,000 feet or 3,400 feet, you said.
Does that make the applicant happy?
Yes.
Does that make the neighboring residents happy?
Yeah. Oh, and I'm much happier right now.
And I would say, if we keep talking land use, we talk about these isolated neighborhoods, and subdivisions, and the limited access points, and everything else. That's something you really listen to Charlotte. I mean, it comes up repeatedly. And when you look across many of the subdivisions, like you mentioned, our subdivision is similar with only one ingress egress. And it creates other problems down the road because at some point you're just going to have connection all down the road. You're not going to have good flow or alternate routes and public safety, you know, for fire equipment to get in there or other access. And I mean, there are accidents in that area regularly. You can totally block up being able to get in or out of the subdivision if there's not other access. But that road will only get built when there's further development of the undeveloped land.
Correct.
Who knows when or if that will happen, but given this county and given Western Chapter in particular, with the large parcels we have, and particularly when we see parcels combined to make larger parcels, I think we're going to run into this situation again. And I don't think that this is just to say, no, don't do it because I like it. I think we do have to think about the long-term aspects of it. And my understanding is they aligned it to straddle the property line to be equitable to both parcels. But at the same time, if that other parcel sells and wants to develop, they're going to have to negotiate with you. They're going to have to work with you to come to an agreement about how to do that because it impacts your property directly. So I feel like that's security, if you will, that nothing can happen without your involvement in the future. I think that's your protection, I guess, I should say. But I think we have to think about the broader land use and development plans.
I do agree.
But if there's no development there, if it's only a what if, then why put it in right now anyway? Why not wait until the if happens and then build the road?
And there are ways where things can happen, such as the road could be platted, and we would figure out some way to make it incumbent upon a future developer of adjacent property to finish it, or require that the funds for finishing it be deposited into an account of the city to guarantee completion, but we get all your other money back. There are various ways to. There does not have to actually be a road there now, but maintaining the possibility of a future road.
So plat it, we have to leave it with vegetation, set an escrow account to cover future costs to build out the suburb on this property when and if the road gets needed.
And that,
If we got rid of this road right here, altogether, just got rid of it, and then sometime in the future this land got developed, or in your case, let's say you decide you're going to sell your 7 acres to a developer, and they take it and develop all this area right here. They've got an access road right here to get to it.
Right. But you still have a single access point to this property that
Yeah.
we're talking about tonight.
And I live in a subdivision with 143 homes, only one way in, one way out. Amanda, Amanda, you live in a subdivision with only one way in, one way out. How many homes in your subdivision?
81.
81. I mean, we're talking about 43 houses.
We have 52 entrances, so.
Yeah. I mean, if the fire marshal isn't requiring it, that the neighbors don't want it, I don't want it. This is a very simple solution. Get rid of the stub out, make everybody happy, as long as we can legally do it.
So the other problem you have to realize if you leave this for reservation is the maintenance of it. Who's going to maintain it, mow the grass? We've run into this before, and it's a real problem because maybe this neighbor mows half of it, but the other neighbor doesn't mow his half, then it becomes another issue.
And you can take properties 32 to 43, move them all up to the northwest, and get that last property out of the floodplain.
Actually, this number 43, which we're coming back to, it's not in the floodplain.
Yeah, Mr. Mike, that is not a floodplain. It's a small dish. Actually, it's not really a dish. It's just a dry dish. You only see water when we have big
Still, you can move everything up to the north, you move the dry ditch, or whatever it is you want to call it. Okay, everybody's happy then.
Yes, sir.
So, well, as long as we can legally do
it. If you state it in the modification that that's what you want to do, it becomes a record.
I think I agree with Mike. I mean, if nobody wants it, and in truth, there's no timeline on when or if it might even take place. Well, it's not even plan board at this point. Now, one other question. Lori, the Kings Grant Way empties out onto Tan Yard.
Yeah.
At one time, there was conversations about having, was there not conversations about extending Tan Yard over to Waxhaw Indian Trail Road?
Long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that still being talked about, or is that so far into the future that it's not an issue?
That was 7 years ago, and it's not progressed at all.
Okay.
I understand like connectivity and like traffic plan, and it would be different to me if like we were connecting like two bigger subdivisions, like that would, but we are indeed developing land that backs up to homes that we're planning to have a road directly through their parcel. And I'm a little more sympathetic because you have the right to develop your land, but she has the right to enjoy her property.
Sure.
To the point, to the reason that she purchased the property. So I lean towards more sort of subdivision modification and taking out the sub-road.
Okay. That makes everybody happy.
Not everybody.
That's easy. I like this.
And again, at this point, we're voting on modifying the block net. If next month, if next month, before we see the final plot map, if adjoining property owners want to talk, Mr. Harrell, it doesn't affect this vote tonight.
Right.
The only thing we're voting for right now is modifying the block net.
Yes.
Not whether there's a stub road or not a stub road. That's something we'll talk about. I'm sure later on.
And so I think you're going to go through each of the findings after the public hearings are done and make your votes then according to what the agenda said. But, I think the best, if you were leaning towards granting the modification in a form that was different than what was applied for, I think probably the safest thing to do would be to change the applicant's request, their request, at your decision to exempt it from the maximum block length rather than setting some sort of
Okay.
distance, just so that.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, from a legal perspective, or maybe George, can we just ask the developer to redesign, come back to council with a new plan, and then vote on the road then?
You can, that would take months.
Months to erase a road?
Yes, because you have to notify the property owner.
We would have to go back to,
Hearing again.
we would have to go back to the,
If you guys don't mind, if I feel the village council tonight can have the option to vote on eliminating this stub street, and we simply make that note on the.
I think that maybe the next hearing could be an opportunity to do that, because you can impose such conditions as might be agreed to between the applicant and the council as to what would make the property or the proposed development better, for lack of
So George, do we close this and come back to it? Okay. So I'm thinking we're going to close this, and after we have the other public hearing open and closed, we'll come back and we'll discuss, and we will make a vote about exempting Lloyd Farm, Dale Farms from the subdivision block maximum. So the first vote, and then the second will be on the next public hearing. Is that clear? Okay, so
Yeah,
anybody want to speak before I close this public
Is
hearing?
the applicant okay with that?
Yes, sir.
I think that, does that make the most sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Anybody else want to speak before I close the public hearing? Okay, so I'm going to close the public hearing on subdivision modification. I'm going to read, and I'm going to open a public hearing on CUP 20-02 McCoy Farm Conservation Subdivision.
I don't think this will take as long.
If there's anyone who was not sworn in previously that would like to speak about this, this would be a time.
Did y'all hear that? If there's anybody who did not speak previously, would you like to be sworn in at this time?
So I will read a brief staff report on this. So Middle Ventures LLC has submitted an application for a conditional use permit to authorize the use of the conservation subdivision pursuant to the zoning ordinance for proposed 43 lot single family residential subdivision located at 4188 West of Chapel Road at the intersection of West Chapel Road and Potter Road. Again, this is one of three required approvals for proposed subdivision, the other being the matter we just took up in this session, and the other being the preliminary plat, which leads to construct. The applicant previously worked with the village planner and engineer on a sketch plan for the proposed subdivision and received administrative approval of the sketch plan on July 29th. For you, the council, and others who are here in the matter, the conservation subdivision standards, which the applicant is seeking a conditional use permit to authorize their use of, have the effect of essentially allowing an alternate set of dimensional regulations along with some requirements of the applicant or the developer in exchange for those. So in the R40 district, lots are permitted to have a 30,000 square foot lot area versus the minimum 40,000 square foot. And up to 30% of the total number of lots can be as small as 20,000 square feet. No increase in density compared to the estimated yield using the conventional zoning standard in R40 is permitted, and so a yield plan that you receive is required to demonstrate what that potential yield is under the standard zoning conditions.
Well, did you take into account on those standard, if it was done under a conventional subdivision, connected wetlands and everything else that goes along with that?
Yes, and so the yield plan is based on the standard. If you were going to develop a standard R40 subdivision, so there isn't a lot in flood plains and things of that nature, and we account for conservation areas or other areas that require conservation, like streams and.
And under the standard, what was the number?
I'm sorry, the yield plan showed 44 dwelling units based on 40,000 square foot lot minimum lot size. So all lots are required to have conservation of land abutting their rear lot line. The minimum width for conservation land abutting lots that are 30,000 square feet or larger is 50 feet and 75 feet for lots between 20,000 and 30,000 square feet. All conservation areas that abut residential areas are required to have a minimum size of 1 contiguous acre. A minimum of 10% of the site required to be permanently preserved as a conservation land and perpetually managed as such. And a minimum 100-foot viewshed buffer is required along all external lot lines adjoining an external road. This particular property has very little external road frontage, and so it's a very small area of this one. And then the minimum lot width, setback, and maximum building height remain the same as the standard R40 district. A question that had come up earlier regarding the density of the subdivision. There's different standards and ways to measure density. If you just take the gross density of the property, or the gross acres of the property, and look at the gross number of lots, I think it came up to 0.67 dwelling units per acre. Removing from that floodplains, roads, road right of way, other areas, water area, ponds that exist on the site, future stormwater BMPs, came out about 0.84 dwelling units per acre. So it is below still the 1 dwelling unit per acre threshold, based on my own calculations.
Okay, so
That's gross acreage.
the
Gross was 0.67 net of floodplains, water, ponds, stormwater BMPs, stormwater flood road, and surface water. That's 0.84. And it's 51.2 acres net of those.
So I thought that Mike's question was, if this were R40 standard applied to this property, then that would be 40-some units?
44. So they prepared a yield plan that was part of the sketch plan approval process to demonstrate the ability of the normal standards for R40 to accommodate the certain number of lots that they would be able to develop without coming to ask for this conditional use permit to do the conservation subdivision. So there is not an increase in the number of lots that are permitted by allowing the conservation by granting a permit, a conditional use permit for the conservation subdivision development standards. There is only a reduction in the lot size.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry?
Maybe I think I'm just mixing the number of units and acreage in my head as you're going through all the numbers.
I'm sorry.
So, I think it's 67 acres.
Yeah. So
it's 43 units here versus 44.
Right.
And the only difference is actually individual lot sizes. And
That's correct.
can we tell on here, it looks like some of these up here are the smaller lot sizes?
There is a bit of, they're kind of scattered a little bit. They're not all contiguous to some of them. The thing they do have in common is they have a deeper amount of conservation land plan.
So the conservation map, I see what you're asking. If we max this thing out in the regular 40,000 foot lots, it would bring all the lots out here to the road. And also, like this lake back here would be in somebody's backyard instead of common area. So we saved all of this back in here. Now some of this is floodplain, wasn't building anyway. Through here, so we saved all this as common area. We're saving this farm. And what helps the neighbors to the east of this plan is it's a 75-foot buffer between the lots and their property. Where the regular ordinance can go right up to it. So those are the differences. There's one lot more that we can get if we did this regular plan. But in this clustering, it helps get all of this off of the road. It helps retain all the common area. And it also helps with impervious surface and stormwater calculations also.
Yeah, to add on Mr. Harold's points, we are pleased, again, from the land planning and site engineering perspective, we're pleased to go with the conservation district. And when we do that, we'll be able to concentrate the developments on the developable lands and then leave all the floodplains and a lot of common open space and as much as tree set as possible for the overall neighborhood to enjoy. Because if we do the 40,000 square foot lot, of course they would have a bigger lot. But then all the land would be individually, black out, and they could literally cut down all the trees if they wanted to. Our neighbor would love to enjoy at least 75 feet of undisturbed buffer, all tree setting. So again, the conservation district, to me, the way the village have that ordinance is really advantage, really good land use option for a development like this. So you see, we'll be able to save up to about 48% in common open space. And by requirement, we only subject to 10% tree save. But with our land planning, we are up to about 30% of conservation land that includes trees, floodplain, grass, open space.
So just a note about conventional versus this type of subdivision is that when you have neighbors backing up to conventional subdivisions, you can have swimming pool 15 feet from your rear property line. And versus if you're on the northeast side here, it would be 90 feet minimum. And so there is a greater separation of development when using the conservation standards based on the way that Wesley Chapel has developed, and because it encourages the use of those buffers, and just the nature of this property being long, just provide basically a strip of conservation land along adjoining neighbor's property lines.
So it's 30% conservation. How much of that is tree saved?
That hasn't been fully determined yet. I think you all submitted some preliminary plats, but that hasn't been finalized yet. The conservation subdivision requirement is that it be minimum 10% of the land be set aside for conservation purposes, and you all are doing a good
Yes,
job.
and so at the moment, because we have gone through a certain level of design already, because we at one point was ready to submit the subdivision plans at the same time of subdivision modification and special use permit. So we are further along. At the moment, we are up to about 34% of conservation land that we can save. That including trees, undisturbed, any vegetation, up to about 34%.
I'll add that I like the way this looks. I like the way that you're conserving the trees, you're conserving the open green space. You're increasing the buffer between the neighbors and you, so that you won't be looking 15 feet over the property line at somebody in their pool.
Yes, sir.
So I'm all in favor of conservation.
Thank you.
That was one of my questions, is I'm trying to look at the drawing and that extra piece. It does look like on that northeast side that there does look like more on the front of it. And that right there compared to the opposite side of the sub, right there.
That has to do with the side, the lot area. And so when you have the smaller lot size requires a greater depth of conservation.
And that's my only comment. It's like, yeah, the script was doing that with more piece, and then you got your point down here about the concentrated piece, which is right at the corner of the roundabout.
Are you talking about this piece right here?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Backing up this is developed.
that's right, because we can only have up to 30% of the total density. That can be 20,000 square feet. The rest got to be 30,000 square feet. So again, just from the land configuration perspective, we need to have this at 30,000 square feet. So when we have 30,000 square foot lot, the buffer has to be at least 50 feet buffer, and that's what we did here. But up here, even though some of this we are subject to 50 feet buffer only, but we went ahead and give you another 25 feet extra. So up here, the entire run has at least 75 feet of undisturbed research. And I would like to point out, if you don't mind, is that we work very hard with the Bureau of Land to really preserve the entire frontage with no lot frontage. So I know, what we do here is creating more than subdivision. We have a community, a neighborhood, a place that can last for generations. So we feel to create that openness coming in is like a wayfinding. It's kind of promote that conservation district feel and setting.
One question about the road as it comes out onto Weston Chapel Road. If the future roundabout goes in at Potter and Potter, do you have a minimum distance between that roundabout and the entrance to the subdivision?
Yes, sir. That's a really good question. We have worked closely with NCUT and trade plans back and forth.
So they've seen this?
NCUT has seen it and signed off on our driveway location. It will be at least 600 feet from the future roundabout.
And what's the speed limit on that road? Do you know?
I'm sorry?
The speed limit?
The speed limit, I believe, probably 45 miles per hour.
Yes. And do you have 450 feet of sight distance?
Yes, I have checked the side distance. It's not full city level, but we have checked horizontal and vertical side distance.
Do you have a left turn lane? I know that's been a sticking point for our planning board. It looks from here, it's just one in, one out. Do you have a turn lane?
The left is from Wesley Chapel go into our property. So when we spoke with NCUT, they say a left turn lane will be required to get into our property. But from outside,
get out of your property.
From outside coming out,
To leave your property.
The egress having a right and a left.
Right. Yes. I think it would be in.
And wouldn't allow a left out because of the relationship to the roundabout. So, if you're coming from Wesley Chapel School, of course we have a
left out.
We have a left in, which would be a center, basically a center turn lane left. But coming out, will be a right-hand turn. We cannot get a left turn going out because that would interfere with the left going in.
Dean, if you don't mind, allow us to clarify with NCDOT. I don't believe they prohibit a left out.
I will say that's a sticking point for our planning board is having like a backup of traffic leaving your neighborhood if you don't have a left.
Yeah, that's one of those things we'll be able to have further discussion on in the preliminary plan that comes through.
You should be able to find that.
I think, to clarify that, the question is not whether you can turn left at the intersection. The question is, will you have enough room on the road to have two cars exiting, one to turn to the right, one to turn to the left, they can be side by side?
Yes, out of the subdivision.
Yes, I believe it's possible. We can add in additional pavement.
I think there's plenty of room there.
Plenty of space.
And we got, yeah, we just have to make it.
Yes.
The heads up now. Right. Yeah, because the heads up, you're never going to do one up on that one.
But, I'm waiting. This has got to happen. The roundabout's got to happen.
Do you own that piece of property?
Yes, we own all the way to here.
Are you going to tear down
The junk stuff we're going to take down. We're going to save the old McCoy house and the barn behind it, but there's a mobile home there.
Yep.
There's one house on the corner about to fall in. The house that's going to be affected here comes down. The mobile homes back here and here come down. So there's some cleanup.
And when I looked at one of the drawings of the roundabout, it looked like it was shifting more towards the south and kind of being centered at that intersection. Was there any insight from DOT or their thinking as you were talking about the entrance points and everything?
They sent us the latest alignment, and when we overlaid it our side, it was okay with our proposed driveway location.
Because most of the people are talking about that intersection, about that roundabout, they say, why affect the Efforts property to the south? Why affect the people on the other side of Wax River Trail Road? When you've got an undeveloped corner there, that road can be shifted to the north and to the west. And the roundabout can still go in. There's plenty of space to put it, and it would have less effect on the neighboring properties that are already developed.
It's sort of like the conversation we've had about this, splitting the line, they can't take more from one than the other, so they have to kind of ease into everybody's roundabout.
Yeah, I think one way or the other really would make a difference there.
Yes.
So if, after the roundabout goes in, what's your plan for that corner?
I don't think there's going to be enough land left to do anything.
No, I mean, we're not allowed to do anything. I would preferably like to see in the future maybe some sort of garden center or farmer's market here, that would be up to the council and what they see in the future of coming to this area. Really not anything heavy commercial or industrial, but something community use. But right now we're just holding, saving the McCoy house and the barn behind it and cleaning up everything.
So what do we need to vote on here? This, I don't see
No, we're
any-
still in a public hearing, so we still have to ask if anyone else would like to speak. Anyone who's been sworn in would like to speak about the conservation subdivision request? Not okay. So I can close the public hearing, which will lead us into council considering the approval of the subdivision modification. So do we just go down the list of things?
I think you've got to hit the subdivision modification first and then the CUP, right? Right.
So do we go down that list of 7 things? Or
The finding of facts.
Oh, the findings? Yeah, I haven't seen them, but yeah.
The subdivision modification, I believe, has 5 required findings, yes.
So do we make an overarching statement?
I would make a motion finding that each one of those, going through each one and agreeing that it did meet that standard. And then if you find that it complies with all of them, you may vote in favor. If you find that it does not comply, then you may vote.
So we have to, for the subdivision modifications, we have to make findings required. We have to take into account the nature of the subdivision, the existing land in the vicinity, the number of persons who reside or work within the subdivision, and the probable effect of the proposed subdivision upon traffic conditions in the vicinity. No modifications shall be granted unless the village council finds A, that there are special circumstances or conditions affecting said property such that the strict application of the provisions of the ordinance to deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of this land.
Is this for the whole subdivision or for the
This is
modification?
the subdivision modification for block plan.
The subdivision, okay.
And so, pardon my interruption. I think it needs to be clarified as to what you are making the findings in regards to, because a discussion was held earlier in which a different relief would be granted than was originally proposed. And so if you're making it, I guess maybe a motion would be in order first to change the relief.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I guess in the public hearing, the applicant agreed to,
right,
in essence, what was an amendment to the application to address that. So I think you can just maybe make, I don't know that you necessarily need to make a motion, but at least acknowledge that it's been modified as previously discussed.
Right. I'm sorry, if you desire to grant complete exemption from the maximum block length standard, then maybe stating that prior to taking any votes on it.
That makes sense.
So council, I'm assuming that we're going to discuss these findings regarding making McCoy Farms exempt from the maximum block length requirements per our ordinance. Okay? So item A, that there are no special circumstances or conditions affecting said property such that the strict application of the provisions of this ordinance would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of this land. Do we do each one?
Get agreement.
Do you do, a motion that you agree that it meets that and then everybody votes on that? Is that how it would work?
You can, yeah. In the past, for the council, I think you've made a motion. The council generally has made a motion on each one to approve. So,
All right, I make a motion that we accept condition number 1, that there are not any special circumstances or conditions affecting said property such that the strict application of the provisions of the chapter would deprive the applicant of reasonable use of his or her land.
Did you say there's not special circumstances?
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
This is what I'm struggling with reading. This is, what are the special circumstances? And that is just the designated 1,500-foot length.
That would be the conservation subdivision there.
And I mean,
if looking at the materials that have been presented to you, you were to observe that the property is very long and skinny. It is not a square piece of land that would allow for a grid street network. Then I think a reasonable person could come to the conclusion that a length of road that was not interrupted would be an appropriate way to develop that land. There are probably similar properties in similar circumstances elsewhere in the village, but y'all have to make those findings.
That's not what I was looking for.
So we have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Make a motion that we accept point number 2, the modification is necessary to the preservation and enjoyment of a substantial property right under the petitioner.
I'll second it. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Cheryl, and read the whole part, I guess, keep it consistent. I agree we accept point number 3, the circumstances given rise to the need of a modification are peculiar to the parcel and are not generally characteristic of other parcels in the jurisdiction of this chapter.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
I agree that we accept point number 4, the granting of the modification will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare or interest to other property in the territory in which said property is situated.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Question, was there a TIA required for this?
It's not required.
Okay.
All in favor?
And finally, I propose that we accept point number 5, the modification will not vary the provisions of chapter 156 of this code of ordinances applicable to the property.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? So that is consideration of our first public hearing.
Do they have to accept
yeah,
the
I would just do one final motion to approve the subdivision as a result of approving it. I know it seems a little strange,
to
but
just approve the subdivision
Approve
modification.
the
the modification.
Yeah.
Right.
And state that it's exempting the
Right.
I'll make a motion to approve the subdivision modification to exempt Four Farms from the maximum lot line requirements as described in our ordinance.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All right, so that leads us to our considering approval of the CUP 20-22.
You guys need your maps?
I would like one.
Any extras?
Just to make sure the considerations are the same for the subdivision modification as for the CUP.
The required findings are different for conditional use permit, as stated in the ordinance, and those are in the memo.
Okay, I see the CUP.
Beginning on page 3.
Yeah. All right, so now we need to consider the CUP application. Do I have any discussion or motion?
And another point would be whether, if this would be the appropriate time to discuss any additional conditions that you might want to discuss with the applicant prior to voting. I don't know what those might be, but if there are.
For example, the step road. For example, the step road.
That could be one of many conditions placed on the
Motion to approve with conditions, with the changes we discussed. The deletion of the stub out road.
Does the applicant?
Wait, what are you approving?
Motion to approve the subdivision as conditional use permit with condition changes to the stub out road. With removal.
Just to approve the stub road, because you can't approve the CUP until you do the finding of facts.
That would be what you would be making. The findings would include that condition was inclusive. That those findings remained with the inclusion of that condition.
And the applicants agree with that?
Yes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
I do have a question about the traffic. Is this the proper time to ask that?
That's why I asked about the TIA.
I want to build on that, Mike. It's said within the findings that there were 42 AM peak hour trips calculated. Well, this may be a question more so for you.
I believe. I think the single-family residential generates 0.98 trips per dwelling unit in AM peak hour. I think off the top of my head, that's not right.
I'm not a traffic engineer, so I do apologize. I don't have the answer. But based on our density, we have previously coordinated with Ron and Robbie Byers and Bonnie Fisher and NCDOT. A TIA is not required for this development.
A major residential subdivision requires a TIA that will exceed 50 AM or PM peak trips. I'm calling the standard ordinance correctly. This fell below that, not a huge number below that, but it did not. We could not require that one be.
So the threshold that's set in our zoning ordinance
It is
or the TIA ordinance is 50 houses or more.
It's not the number. It's the number of trips, and I can tell you where. So a TIA is required for all development, redevelopment projects requiring a conditional use permit having a residential component anticipated to generate more than 50 AM or PM peak hours trips. And so that's part of the zoning ordinance. And so this fell, and the same thing for a major subdivision. This is two different things that's spelled out in the ordinance. So it's both a major subdivision and a conditional use containing a residential component. And the threshold is 50 AM or peak hour, AM or PM peak hour trips for each. And this, based on the ITE trip generation manual, that shows the distribution of estimated peak hour trips, or estimated trips generated by different types of development. Throughout the day, it would have been 41 point something trips. So it would fall below the threshold.
So there's two factors. There's a standard factor that has to be applied, and you said that's 0.98.
That's how we. Yes,
that's the residential neighborhood, and then there's the other aspect of the threshold, using that standard factor. Did I get
So the ordinance requires that the ITE trip generation manual be used as the basis for estimating trip generation to determine whether or not.
And that's what it's telling us, it's 0.98.
Yeah, the number's like 0.98 or 0.99. But yes, that's where that number comes from.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was very long.
No, it explains how we got to that number, other than somebody saying,
If-
well, the standard's 50, I'll say it's 42.
Right. If you a 52 or 3 lot major subdivision is going to be on the cusp of.
And that's where DOT made their recommendations, is pretty much.
And DOT can require their own even if the village does not.
Could the village require their own if DOT does not?
Yes, but the ordinance, that would be varying a provision of the ordinance, not in favor of applicant to do that. They would have to agree to do that, to make it a. The county, the ordinance has established a standard at which if they would have needed a TIA, we would have started it. I mean, if they had to do it, we would have wanted to start about 6 months ago to keep this on track.
So we meet or exceed the standards.
I'm sorry?
So we've met or exceeded this. We don't need a TIA.
One is not required by the ordinance, and so we did not.
Not by county or state or Wesley Chapel ordinances.
If we did not require one, and so the state has not asked that they do one either. So.
All right, any further discussion? So we have a motion, right?
To set the standard to which you're going to be measuring the findings of fact.
Right. Which is a motion to approve pending or available at the step. Do we have a second? So, any further discussion?
And we're voting just on our removal of shut
On the
So
We're just going, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's basically, I mean, you're blessing, in essence, what you're about to vote on with respect to the findings of fact.
Will this come back to us again?
You will see a preliminary subdivision plat within the next few months.
George, I'm sorry. Do we need to go through all 7 points?
Well, you need to approve what you just did first, and then, yes, then you need to do exactly what you just did on the subdivision.
Okay.
All right, so all in favor?
You want me to roll with it? Oh, I'm sorry.
Was that a nay?
That's a nay.
Okay, thank you. That's fine.
Yes, sir.
Roll. Make a motion that we approve point number 1, the use will not materially endanger the public health, safety, or welfare located where proposed and developed according to the submitted plan and not create dangerous traffic conflict points, obnoxious odors, sounds, glare, or environmental hazards.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Motion we approve point number 2, the use meets all required conditions and specifications.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Motion we approve point number 3, the use will not substantially injure the value of adjoining or abutting property and will not hinder future development potential of adjacent properties by the introduction of agreeable land use or incompatible development scale or intensity.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Make a motion we approve point number 4, the location and character of the use is developed according to the plan and submitted and approved will be in harmony with the area in which it is to be located, will not disrupt the integrity of existing land use districts, and will be in general conformity with this chapter and the village's land development plan.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Motion we approve point number 5, availability of services including water, wastewater treatment, gas, storm water is required by the project.
Second.
Any further discussion?
One, is this backed by the county's engineers, public works?
As far as water and sewer, is that
Yes, sir. Union County Public Works has approved the sketch plan for sewer water connection, and then we have also submitted the full city plans and have the first red light back. So we're in the process.
No issues with capacity of water or sewer.
Yes, so when we submit for the sketch plan approval, that's when they check off for the capacity request.
I believe we've gotten a letter from them verifying.
The letter, I need to check, and I'll be more than happy to forward.
We require a letter of the existence of this capacity.
I'm just asking if that box has been checked. It sounds like it has been. Okay.
All there?
I think you're on 6.
Yeah, point number 6, access to public streets and the adequacy of those streets to carry anticipated traffic and on-site circulation for both pedestrian and off-site vehicular traffic circulation patterns.
Second.
I make a motion to approve one. Oh, sorry. I need to look up, I guess, before I go on to the next point. I've already started that twice. I apologize.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
It's a rare event.
I promise I'll look up. Oh, motion to approve one number 7, adequate safety and emergency services.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? And so then we need to make one final motion to approve the conditional use permit 20-02 from the McCoy Park Conservation Subdivision. So motion.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
I'm sorry, who made the motion itself? You did?
I
Okay.
seconded it.
Thank you.
Before we move on, we take a break. Necessity break.
Okay, very good. Go.
Are we done with all your stuff? Are we doing all that stuff?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I'd like to comment.
5 minute break. We're going to go through the rest of the drill now. Okay? John is not here. I know that we talked about benches, the other benches and stuff we have not been ordered because John submitted information to Cheryl for parks for a purchase order. So we can go ahead and we can go ahead and move on to the next item unless y'all have any objections. No objections.
Do you want an update on the muskrats?
Oh, yeah.
How many we got?
We always want to know.
We got 3 rats.
Just 3?
Just 3.
They're giant.
But, yeah, we got to see a picture of them, yeah.
Did we get them mounted?
Pardon? You want a tail? Or?
I want them mounted, yeah.
Yeah, well, he got 3, but then he felt like the pond, I don't know, for one reason or another, the rats moved along. He said something about there was ice, and usually there's bubbles under the ice when they're there, and there weren't any. So they've moved along, and John sent me an email today and said, well, we'll probably have to get them again in the spring, but the trapping season ends in February, which I sent John an email back, so we'll probably have to do it again. I'm not sure exactly when.
So how are we trapping the muskrats? Are they live traps or are they,
We hired someone. He's a licensed and approved trapper.
Muskrats in muskrat heaven? Okay.
I'm not sure there is such a thing.
Can't leave me for any of the items. I'm happy to stay if you do.
I think you're good. You can go home. Thank you, Mom.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we're still talking about the rats. I think it's time to
It's
go.
time for me to get out of here. These will be the final ones we'll send out for the planning board.
Okay, I'll probably be talking to you tomorrow about planning.
Yeah, we will.
Okay. Have a good evening.
We have an employee who's currently working from home.
Oh, wait, did you move along in that?
I did.
Okay.
We have an employee who's currently, I don't want to know what it is out there, working from home. But does anybody have any changes to our operating procedures? Cheryl says things are running pretty smoothly, so I think we just continue on.
Yeah, I think we continue on, but we may
I know that Van,
We don't allow anybody to come home.
yeah, and Van had said that of all his other towns he was going to, we were the only one that were having a in-person meeting.
Well, the other towns have the facilities to accommodate something like this. Is the question.
Some of them do, yeah. Mhm.
My only question is there proper signage on the door so if somebody comes by for something as simple as like a pool permit,
Yeah.
that they can get in touch with us and they're not inconvenienced?
There's a phone number, there's an email for Amy and for me, and, you know, I asked Amy to check hers a couple times a day, and I was in here almost, well, I was here. I come for an hour and end up staying for, you know, longer.
I'm fine with that.
I was here from like 9 to 3 today, yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you all. See you soon.
So that moves us into contract administration and procedure. Lori, you want to take that? First part?
Management, and I had something written up and I will email it to you, but basically creating a document with specifying various types of contracts and who should act as a project manager, responsibilities of the project manager, scope of authority type of things, and essentially saying every time we're going to make a contract, council should make decisions about certain things. And so trying to say if it's a services agreement for, you know, one time like putting up the decorations, you know, it seems like staff should manage that, what's their authority to do that, versus approaches like the playground, which is like a one-time event, kind of special project. You know, officially naming project manager responsibilities, expectations, etc. And Amanda had mentioned wanting to go through the rules and procedures. Did you repeat that?
No, I'm going to give this to you.
Oh, and looking at the project management aspect, I asked her, I said, is this something you see should go in the rules and procedure, or how do you want to do it, because it's going to be a policy type thing? And she indicated it made sense to be in rules and procedure, and that's where I was like, well, if we're going to do the rules and procedure whenever we get to new things, then it seemed appropriate to talk about contract management. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. So we would probably just add in an item here for contract.
Yeah, and I don't know, you know, within the sequencing of the document, if there's a place that says, hey, I would make a plan to go through the rules and procedure, like you want to say, let's go page by page, piece by piece, save everything new to the end, you know, whatever you want to do.
I think we go page by page, and this, it kind of, I'm going to do this. I think it kind of makes sense to maybe go until we get to our specific offices. So maybe if we could review rules 1 through 10 for discussion at our next meeting, and then with them, Mr. Martin to do, you know, 11 through whatever, and then Mark can do the last bit, to put this in a good shape for our April, or for our May meeting. Okay, so if y'all will review rules 1 through 10 for our February meeting, and we'll go from there. Okay. And we'll just, wherever you feel like contract administration fits in, we'll get on it when we get there. I see we add in things as we go through each page. All right, so that we took off item 14. So item 15, update on request for the USPS collection box, Cheryl.
Oh, you know, have you ever tried to contact the post office? It's not easy. I tried calling and different things. I finally put in a email request. I don't know. They sent me back a form letter, you know, we received your request, and I'll wait a little bit, and then, I don't know, I'll try some more. You just can't get a hold of these people. If anybody has a clue, let me know.
If a guy showed up with a truck with a mailbox on the back of it, that put across the channel, where would you put it?
Well, when I talked to our mailman, that was the first place I started. He's from the Matthews Post Office, and he's a good mailman. And I asked him, I said, do you think we'd have any chance to get in the post office box? And he laughed and said no. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, there's one just down the road. And I said, you mean, he said, down 84. I said, you mean at Providence? I said, that's like 6 miles away. And he said, well, he said, it'd be good for me if you get a box, which leads me to believe there's maybe some monetary incentive there. He sounded, like it would be real nice. But he just didn't think that they would approve it. He told me the name. It's Tracy Austin is the postmaster in Matthews, and I guess I could go to the Matthews post office and try to knock on a door. I don't know. I've tried calling.
You're talking like outside of Harris Teeter?
Well, I talked to him. I said, he said, where would you put it? And I said, well, we could put it here. I said, maybe we could put it at the shopping centers. I'm open to an idea here.
I went to mail something from the regular mail. I went to the packing post place, and they said, can't touch it. So
Postnet wouldn't touch it?
Postnet wouldn't touch it. I had to drive to Mineral Springs to drop off my package. It was already pre-packaged, had stamps on it, all that kind of stuff.
So the packaging store was open, but one day back?
Well, it was one through it wasn't going through FedEx or UPS, it was just going.
They have a slot you can put mail in. Maybe not a maybe not a package.
They turned me away.
Huh.
So. And then when I went to Mineral Springs, the line was 30 people long, about an hour long wait, so I said, go through that.
Was this the 15th of December? Was it the Christmas rush?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep trying, Cheryl.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. All right, that brings us to considering approval of the interlocal agreement that Cheryl sent. Cheryl, do you want to speak to that?
This was, you and I had met with Union County about the water and sewer and all. And this came from them. And if you read the agreement, in some ways it seems very reasonable. In others, it's like a 30-year agreement. I don't know. I think I would just read it very carefully and take it seriously before I'd approve it.
Have we endorsed with that?
I'm trying to remember. I think I sent it to him, and I don't think he sent back.
Because when I read it, I know that one of their points here, because I heard them say it, was they're trying to get municipalities to stop approving those package plants. Because they're just such a pain to maintain. But I did get told, it says we have to come to this for permission for stuff. And it says that they can do things without coming to us. But I don't know.
I definitely think George should review it. And I want to, not a quantitative type thing, but the, I don't know, the attitude that everybody is a little concerned.
Are other municipalities being asked to sign the same agreement?
They are right now. I don't know who has signed it yet.
And maybe we could have Cheryl sniff around and see if everybody else signed theirs without. She could ask all the clerks if they signed theirs without any reservation.
Yeah, or what concerns came up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens if we don't agree?
We make the county love us even more.
I know one question came up. Somebody told me, why is this being pre-audited for the finance officer? It's like we're not spending any money with them.
Yeah. So we'll have George review it, Cheryl do some sniffing with the clerk,
Okay.
and we'll come back to it again in February.
Can we poll the Alliance too and see if
Sure.
we've got backup in there?
And so that brings us to the Western Union Municipal Alliance. So basically what came out of the last Alliance meeting where Richard Helms and I can never remember this guy's name. And I was like, yeah, there's no middle-aged bald white guy. That didn't end up being either. No, that's Tony.
You said middle-aged.
Right. Well, he's probably not middle-aged. Not right there, no. Jerry Simpson. Jerry Simpson. So Jerry was there, and Richard, and Pat, and Lee, and Brian Matthews, who Commissioner Helms had requested that we invite. And it's just interesting because we've been in interactions with the county a lot longer than Marvin and Weddington, in the, getting the bad end of the deal in most of these. But one thing they said is they really would rather us, when we come to them, to not just say what we don't want, but to say what we would want there, and like what we envision there, or what our land use plan or our comp plan says would go there. So I gave my notes to David, and thank you, David and Mike, for both going. Resident guys did a great job. But was saying, that we saw the proposed senior housing, Howie Farms, what they're calling Howie Farms, being a residential area that being developed 1 house per acre, which would give them way less houses than 89 and blah, blah, blah. So that's going to the county on February 1st at 6 p.m. I'll be there. I don't know if anybody else wants to go, but I'll be there February 1st. The planning board did deny it, so that was good.
It was split, it was 4 to 2.
4 to 2. And the conversations that came out of that were sort of interesting too. And that one of the planning board members asked specifically, isn't there some way that we can address these donut holes? Yeah. But then, just prior to the vote, another one of the planning board members said, well, we've heard about what Wesley Chapel wants. This is not Wesley Chapel's land. And it was just sort of...
But these are the same ones going to present a comprehensive plan to the Board of Commissioners with greater municipal input on adjacent land.
Well, I will say that last week I went to the 2050 comp plan, and the consensus from that was 2 things. One, we need to pump the brakes both at a county level and at a municipal level, especially the zoning changes. And I think that kind of goes without saying. As far as the donut holes go, their recommendation to the county commissioners would be close the donut holes. So even though the property that we looked at specifically, the Epcot property, is unincorporated Union County, if the county commissioners take the recommendation of the committee for the 2050 plan, we're going to close that donut hole. We're going to make it part of Wesley Chapel. Therefore, since that's what's probably going to end up happening with it anyway, I think the planning board saw that as, well, it's going to be eventually Wesley Chapel anyway. Let's go ahead and follow Wesley Chapel's guidelines and not make it high density.
Okay.
So that was, as soon as we left the room, that's what they did, is they updated Lee Jensen updated the planning board about 2050 comp plan.
Well, so that's the other thing. Have you all filled out the new revised questions?
Over 80% of it is all coming from us.
That all comes from the Sandy Ridge part of the county, which is us. And WUMA, we have asked, and I think we've received feedback from everyone that they are going to pass resolutions against Howie Farms supporting us. So that would be one thing we can present to the county, everything with our, we're part of the WUMA organization, and here we have these 5 resolutions stating.
But you're going to have one-on-one conversations with Richard and with Gary before the meeting.
Before what meeting?
Just let them know that WUMA is doing
that. Yeah, the next one the meeting is they will actually meet before the county meeting.
So is it still going before the county commissioners?
Yes, on February 1st at 6 p.m.
What about the whole easement, if it was legal for the HOA or Wesley Oaks HOA to sell the easement?
I talked with Lee Jensen about that. I said, I need you to run by legal. We haven't gotten back to me yet. I said, I need you to run by legal as whether it's even permissible. Because the example we used at the meeting was, you talk about the cart before the horse. We got the cart, the horse isn't anywhere on the farm. I mean, they haven't gotten the information from the DOT, from Wesley Chapel, from the HOA, who says that they'll sell it, but at the same time, they're not sure they have the legal right to do so.
And if that land's been held in perpetuity, I don't see how that can sell.
Right, that's what Lee and the legal department of the county is in the process of looking
That was the subdivision that was actually approved in the county, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, original.
And then we annexed it.
Yeah, and part of my comments that David was kind of agreed with, and even Lisa, like, that was part of the county, like, smart growth, and that really didn't go so well, so they kind of fulfilled that. I think they did an article, County Weekly did an article on that, and it got a lot of positive press from residents on the side of the county to see everybody working together. So that's nice. Any further questions or comments before we move to item 18? I guess we need a motion to remove Elaine from the Board of Adjustment.
It's actually the mayor.
Oh, I do it?
Well, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. Board of Adjustment would be council. Yeah.
So
I'm
somebody
sorry.
needs to make a motion?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should shut up.
I guess we have to officially remove. And I asked her family if we could do something to honor her, like publicly, and they said no. Apparently, with her daughter being in England and her other daughter was in Raleigh, with the house being empty, until they take care of her mother's affairs, they don't want publication. We're out in public that the house is empty. So Cheryl has told Brandon, we've been doing extra drive-bys and keeping that side. But I told her daughter, as soon as it is okay, to let us know, because we would like to post something, or we would like to do, post something or do something in her honor. So stay tuned. I don't know how long that will take. But to have a motion to remove Elaine Ross from the Board of Adjustment.
Not going to do it. I knew her too well. I'm not going to do it.
I just don't understand why we have to remove someone who needs to see.
Pardon?
I mean, it seems like that's a de facto removal.
I mean, if we have a case come up and we need a board, we need to fill a spot. And I mean, she died.
Nothing in our rules or anything else that says if a member dies, that position's considered empty or open. Is that a gap we need to close?
Is it in our rules and procedures we need to update?
Think of a nice way to say it. And we haven't had any members that I can remember that have died. I mean, we've accepted resignations and things, but it's not quite that.
I would like to sadly and with great remorse relieve Elaine Ross from her duties to be on the Board of Adjustment, and that I hope she is in a much better, happier place, enjoying the art work with me.
I'll second the relief. I like the way you said that.
On the favor? Council comment. I'll go first, and I'm glad everybody else left. I had a very unpleasant phone conversation with Deputy, or Sheriff Kathy. I thought Todd Elmore was unpleasant, but he retired, so that's good.
Todd's retired?
He's retired.
When?
I don't know.
Who did?
Todd Elmore retired.
I didn't know that.
I saw it on Facebook, because I was snooping. It actually, he popped up to be a friend, and I was like, but I did look in the page.
Does he still live next to the fire station?
But, so Sheriff Kathy was basically, he wanted to set up a meeting with me, so we could discuss the need for additional deputies for Western Chapel. And he had talked to Cheryl, and Cheryl said, you gotta talk to me. So I said, you can't talk to me, you can come to council. He's like, well, that's not how we do things. And I was like, well, if you want to talk to anything you have to say to me, you're going to need to say to the four of us. And he said, well, do you really want that kind of information in public? And I was like, yeah, I'm no elected official or anything you're going to say to me. He's like, I think this phone conversation is getting off on the wrong foot. And I was like, well, there's no need to come just talk to me. I'm just one voice of four. And he was like, well, do you really want that kind of information? It could be embarrassing. And I was like, I'm not embarrassed. Like, what? Anything you have to say to me, you can say. So I don't do backward meetings. He was like, this is not a backward deal. I'm going to end this phone call now. And I was like, okay, I don't do backward meetings with developers, but anything you have to say to me, you can say in public. But that's just not how we do things. We meet with town managers. We don't have a town manager, so this is just a council. And he said, well, Wesley Chapel just keeps adding stuff and approving stuff, and that's why you need additional deputies. And Brandon is only responding to 13% of your calls, and Weddington's doing 5%, and Marvin's doing 2%, and I'm going to put a stop to that. So I plan to have my little, so I've invited him to come and speak to us in February, and I plan to have my little phone ready. So when he says, I'm going to put a stop to that, or like Todd Elmore said the last time he was here, that nobody was going to come running to Wesley Chapel, it's going to be recorded. But he's coming to talk to us and tell us that we need new deputies. So I'm sure I'll draw up a spreadsheet that shows like how much rooms cost each year, and I'll send it to y'all. But I do want to do some additional research and see like what is Weddington's overall operating budget and how much their deputy cost, and maybe Marvin, since that's who we get compared to the most. Because he was like, I said, well, we did do a survey, and hopefully we'll have the results of the survey, and I'll be here to share that with you. But, you know, we asked residents if they'd like a tax increase, and he was like, why do you have to raise your taxes? I was like, because we are a low service town. And he's like, well, can't you just do it? And I was like, do you understand that all we provide for our residents are planning and zoning services, our park, and deputy? Well, I just don't know why you can't. Y'all just keep adding stuff. So another thing I would like to do, Cheryl, is what exactly have we added? Since we hired Brandon, is there a way to figure out how many housing units we've approved per year? Because we haven't built any new. We approved a parcel OI, but we haven't built any new commercial.
Every year I have to report to the state about what building permits have been approved during the year, yeah.
And also, I think it's important to point out that when we originally brought Brandon on, we were able to offset the cost of his contract with privilege licenses.
And she's got that file.
And we no longer can collect those privilege licenses, so when we pay his, what is it up to, $117,000?
No, it's about 101.
101.
Kind of like the Dalmatian.
It's not being offset by any kind of taxes on local businesses. So it's all coming out of our general fund. Now, what percentage of Brandon's contract, that $100,000, is the town's budget?
It's like 13%, roughly.
Okay.
Kind of consistently, like a 10 to 15% of our operating budget.
So if we turn around and bring on 2 more deputies, that's going to make more than a third of our budget specifically just for Brandon, or just for contract deputies. And the fact that he's only responding to 13%, which I was told was 11%, we're still getting coverage from Weddington, Indian Trail, and everything else. But we don't have a high crime area.
Well, it was not a very friendly conversation. And when I told him, he said, well, what I hear from residents is that they want more deputies. I said, well, what I hear from residents is they don't want their taxes increased. And that they pay taxes, so they are entitled to the county deputy cover. He said, well, that is true, but think about that Indian Trail also pays county taxes that they pay for their own deputies. And Monroe also pays county taxes that they pay for the police force. So same for Weddington. Like, everybody pays the county taxes, but they're also providing additional deputies. But my question, and David and I had a conversation about this earlier, is what will a second deputy do for us? Is it just response time? And what are these response times for? Is it for bad alarms? Is it for target? Like, what are we going to be paying for greater response time for? Why do we need more? So if he says, oh, we're talking about the stuff you've been improving, I'll say, oh, what, the 100 houses we approved here?
Well, what I would ask you to do is take the deputy report that we get every month and circle all the incidences that you feel are time sensitive. Wellness check or business check or serving papers on someone. That is not a time sensitive task. It's not about how quickly you get there. So, and you have to take all the numbers you get from the county, they're skewed to some degree because statistics drive budgets, especially at the county level. So when there's a car accident right out here in front of the town hall, you might have the fire department show up. You might have the police department show up. You might have an ambulance show up. For that one fender bender, each department wants to get their cut of the statistics. So they're all going to report. Responding to an accident, responding to an accident, responding to an accident. There's one accident that got credited 3 times. Once for fire, once for police, once for ambulance.
Well, I just want y'all to be prepared with any questions that you may have. Kurt Lauer, Sheriff?
I was able to attend the meeting last year, but I understood some of the data, but I have questions about that, so I'm waiting for him to tell me, how many cases they solved, or how many incidents, or whatever their percentage is, and then make sure he's only talking about the staff he's paying for, not that the municipalities are paying for, because he wants to use the deputies on the municipalities are paying for to say, we're clearing this much crime, or whatever it is, without acknowledging, within his budget, without acknowledging, no. That's not.
Also keep in mind that the $101,000 that we pay per year does not go directly to Brandon. Maybe 45.
How much he makes?
47.
You probably could figure it by looking at their salary survey, their salary scale, and how he's been there a while.
$50,000 a year. Fine. The rest of the $50,000 we're paying goes to overhead, which means it goes into the sheriff's captain's pocket. He decides what to do with it, as far as whether it goes for squad cars or equipment or whatever. And they just approved the new building in front of the sheriff's department. Maybe seen the groundbreaking on that. I don't know how that new building directly affects residents of Wesley Chapel. I don't know how it benefits the residents of Union County. Now, does it benefit the police department? Absolutely. Does it directly benefit the residents of Union County? Not really sure that does.
Well, he's coming in February. I don't know what he talked about, but
Did they make these in lead that you just clamp on my face and tell me to shut
I'll
up?
look for one. I just want y'all to be prepared, and I'm sure, just based on my conversation with him, I think he's going to come in very pushy or very aggressive. Very aggressive.
Actually, no. The reality is the exact opposite. If you've ever met Sheriff Cappy and talked with him one-on-one, he is actually very calm and personable face-to-face. He can make a good politician because he will shake your hand and tell you all these great things, but he will not. He will spin and twist every statistic. So he's a master at it. Trust me, police are masters. Police officers, law enforcement officers, whatever. They're masters at manipulating the conversation. So you may come in thinking we're going to do. It's not going to go that way. I guarantee it's not going to go that way.
Well, so, I think there's a big way to look up. No more deputies.
We're happy with our
because there's no budget.
Well, the issue. Well, exactly. One, there's no budget. But the issue is, I don't like being strong-armed by anyone. And we've been strong-armed by Todd and now Sheriff Cappy.
So if I can, I'll try to get with Cheryl again about what I want to have in our back pocket. Because when he's saying, well, y'all should have it, well, we don't have budget the way he does to pay $300,000 deputies. We don't have to budget like we are small. This is our population compared to just throw some data at him. We need John to come to this meeting and throw some data at him.
John will press some numbers.
Yeah, but that's fine. That's my comment. Just be prepared and be safe out there. That's all I'm saying.
A couple things. Well, we already talked about the Epcot property and why they voted against it, even the density was inconsistent. We also talked about the 2050 comp plan, closing donut holes. The thing that came up tonight was this tax rate. How many of you guys knew about this before tonight? Were you a little shocked?
Surprised, right?
A little surprised, a little taken aback? I think that when John Q. Public Resident was the capital, I think probably got the hurricane to go through what we did in the capital.
But y'all know it's not.
Well, no, I don't think they do. I think the point being is they're going to say my taxes went up and you're an elected official and it's your fault, period.
But I really felt like when he was talking, I wished I had a chance to give some input afterwards. I've been through the revaluations here several times, and every time I have to come up with a revenue neutral spreadsheet, worksheet that I go through, and I'll compute. And Wesley Chapel as a whole may go up 30%, but Lori's house may have gone up 50%, and Mike's only 20%. You will end up paying less taxes, Lori will end up paying more taxes, and if Amanda and David both had her house go up 30, you'll pay the exact same tax. So the tax, what we charge people for tax it's not a 30% windfall. It's not in any way that we come up with the revenue. Now, if a town doesn't adhere to the revenue neutral rate, then they get a windfall, but that's where citizens need to yell at their elected officials and complain.
Says that if I'm paying $1,000 in property tax today, I'll pay $1,000 tomorrow, even if my house goes up because the tax rate goes down.
Right, as long as you don't go up more than the average there.
Right. And you exceed those thresholds, and then you'll see something.
Right.
For the majority of people, they're probably going to be in this space, unless we say, hey, by reducing that to that revenue neutral tax rate in our next budget, is it sustainable for us? And then we have to increase the tax rate. And some people that got a rate increase in here will be really unhappy.
Well, and that's raising taxes.
I think
It's only because we have to raise taxes to make up for lost income because of the appraisal, because values went higher. Yeah.
I just think it's important that we get ahead of this and inform as many of the residents as possible before there's a crowd of people with pitchforks at the door looking for us.
I'm going to get on their number.
Exactly. The other thing is, I'd like to just get, I know Amy's working from home, side suite.
She already did one.
No, there's signs everywhere. They're all illegal. They make the town look crazy, crazy ghetto, and...
Can you make a list of where they are and send them? You can order it today and be back tomorrow. It doesn't mean she missed anything.
Well,
Or she makes a sweep today and somebody posts on tomorrow. It doesn't necessarily mean she missed anything.
well, I'd like to figure out a way to get rid of them, whether that's Amy goes and gets them, we make a list, so I go out and get them, then it used to be we'd go out once a month and we'd collect them and just turn it off and it fixed the problem. Now I've seen signs everywhere. So,
I think if we see them, we just let Amy know where they are. That will help us get down the mental area that a problem with.
But she shouldn't be going out this week.
Yeah, no.
that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you mentioned stay safe. The situation with the pandemic, I think, is very concerning. When you look at the rates for the state of North Carolina, but in particular Union County, at the end of 20% positivity rate, the burden it puts on our medical system, which appears to be at the breaking point. Samaritan's Purse has created 5 field hospitals in the western part of North Carolina because of overflow because of COVID. So what that means is that our medical staffs are getting stressed, the entire medical infrastructure is getting stressed, so people are in a car accident or have a heart attack may not be able to get service because they take an ambulance or even get to the hospital. And that's the situation California is in now. And they were more restrictive than some of our places. So I don't think we can discount how serious this is, especially as they're talking about new variants or strains of the virus coming. Fortunately, we do have a vaccine coming, and I just think that it would be great if we can help publicize, that vaccination program and take advantage of it as soon as you're eligible, and talk to your doctor if you have questions about it, because following the guidance, always wear your mask. If you're not in your house or your family, always wear your mask. And the 6-foot distance, even with the mask. And wash your hands, and don't go places and do things you don't need to do. And vaccination's the only way we're going to get ahead of this. And I just feel very strongly that if I were in the medical profession pursuing an education in that field, I'd turn around and change directions. And so, so grateful that these people are so committed to everything they're doing. I feel like we just need to make sure we can do everything we can, publicize that and support that, in the community. And I don't know if that means at some point, if no one holds a vaccination clinic or something, they'll sponsor it. But I just feel like we need to help support the executive orders, the secretary orders, and everything else, just for everybody's well-being. But frankly, when I see what's happening in California, it's kind of scary. I mean, they essentially, the EMT's been told that if the person wants to die, don't bother picking them up.
If the person
Won't survive, don't bother picking them up. There's no sense bringing them to the hospital. If your oxygen level is low, we're only going to give you enough to get you to bare minimum. And then we're going to take you off of it because you're out of oxygen. We don't want to. We can't afford it for you to get to 100% saturation yet. We'll get you to 96 and then we're taking away from somebody else who needs it. That's the situation. And so along those lines, tonight, we had a lot of people in here in a fairly close space, even if the chairs were sort of 6 feet apart, for a very long period of time. And with a 20% positive rate, we know 50% of the cases are asymptomatic carriers. It's a good chance that somebody in here was infected. But we don't. And we don't think about that as we're going through this. And it's just scary. And like we mentioned that all the other towns are being virtually, I do think we may have to get to where we know exactly how we can pull that off at a moment's notice if we have to. So we can continue the business. Now, there was no way we could have done what we did tonight virtually. But maybe it could have been a special meeting for that one topic. Maybe that would have reduced participation. I don't think so, but.
You can do a public hearing virtually.
Well,
I mean, we would need to prepare for it.
You can, but it is more logistically challenging. Yes.
Because we've got 2 public hearings next month, or 1 at least.
Next month is cell phone tower.
I think I do.
Good work on the planning board, Union County Planning Board notes, and good work, Mike, on sharing your information too. That was it's good to see. It's good to see that we've got unity, between our council. That's exciting. Speaking of exciting, I'm very excited about the conservation subdivision. There was something else. There were 2 things that I had people reach out to me on.
201.
All set. Well, maybe it'll come to after I get through point number 1. But a close by landowner called and asked me about the rezoning notice that went up for McCoy Farms. Let me back up for a second. 6 years ago, Stephen Kennedy was Keeney was the planning board chair, and the developers brought the Candela project to us. It was a semi-pseudo conservation subdivision before anything was put into works, and he fussed and argued in favor of that, and we should have looked at it closer, but because it wasn't R40, and because we'd always done it the R40 way, it never made it past that point. If you look at Candela now, that's probably not the best use of that property. I mean, we talked about backyards, backing up the backyards. Aesthetically, it could have been a whole lot better.
It was a field.
It was a
soybean field, corn field, depending on what year it was.
Yeah.
We realized that piece of land was.
That's right. But then by the same token, whenever we went against the most recent time that we've gone against R40 has been senior housing. And again, if you look at, I'm looking with my blinders on, just looking at the discussions that took place with planning board. That was when the planning board chair said that it was a travesty for us to consider anything and resigned immediately. There's a lot of passion about doing things the way that we've always done them and about things being something less than R40. And I would say that we need to be careful and mindful of that. I mean, again, I'm super charged up about having a conservation subdivision going in. I'm going to watch it. But at least there's 2 property owners that are in the village that have already asked, well, why aren't we doing anything less than R40?
He asked, why
Anything less than R40.
I don't think the less than R40 in a conservation subdivision done the right way, but I think we have to tighten up the net calculations for density to make sure we've taken out everything so you don't have like an Abington Crossing power thing in your backyard.
Yeah.
You know, like every possible thing has to come out for you to do that calculation, and then when it is the same number of units, and you can demonstrate more aesthetically pleasing, for one, with the trees, which we keep hearing that looks better. I do think that gets, easier for people to understand, especially when you have them that are adding to property. But again, they were both empty fields. So, whereas this property's got trees and, some topography to it, it's a little different.
Sure.
But it was also interesting to me with that, just the location of it, and as well as strip. I'm like, just that's what happens when you come with your property owners wants to do something, or they get with one of their buddies. You're going to have these little landlocked islands out there that aren't going to like it.
Again, I'm charged up about it. I think it's going to be a good move. I'm hoping that it's going to be a really pretty community. I remember the second thing because I remember where it took place. Sometimes being unknown in the village of Wesley Chapel is a good thing. When you walk into Harris Teeter and there's a panhandler outside Harris Teeter, sometimes it's not so good to be on the council. I got pulled over just as I got into the produce section and asked, what can we do about that? Do we have any policies within the village about that? And if so, how do you address them? And I'm only asking because I was accosted in the grape section.
Yes, we do, and this was something that Janine Kennedy pushed through because she ran into exactly the same situation. There were some ladies sitting in Harris Teeter with her kids begging for money, and she's like, "Oh, I don't want to see that in Wesley Chapel." But I have to I don't know what specifically we have.
Are you talking about a specific person?
I didn't even see it, but they said there was somebody that was playing an accordion.
The violin outside the Target?
I didn't see it.
He's got a sign out that says, "Lost my job, I've got 4 kids, can't pay my rent," and he's playing the accordion, hoping people will drop $1 in his hat.
Well, Brandon sent me a email one day and said, "Don't we have an ordinance against panhandling?" And I went and looked, and the only ordinance we have is about in residential.
Yes.
And because I wrote back to him, I said, "Well, Brandon, there's this here," and he said, "Yeah, but that's only for the residential." And I said, "Yeah, you're right." So I know Brandon, and Brandon was like, "I want to get him." And but then I saw it myself. A guy playing a violin outside of Target. So I don't think we have one. I don't think we have anything that.
Well, I've never seen it, but I would support an ordinance to ban it. I don't think people should be accosted coming in and out of shopping centers.
Brandon is not usually very aggressive, and he seemed a little more aggressive that day in his email. I was surprised. I have to ask him what happened.
I'm sure we had pressure from residents.
Did he get the guy to move along or not? I don't know.
The next thing you know, they'll be standing in the median with a part of the room like they are.
Yeah, we have that over by Waverly. If you've ever been in that Waverly, there's usually somebody at that intersection trying to get you to buy something.
Could we, I know we can't make motions for council comment. Could you bring that up with John for planning board into a panhandling ordinance in commercial area or expanding our residential?
If you want, but really those ordinances, Planning board deals with land use.
So this should
I think
be
it's
added.
really something that is outside the realm of planning
We had it in
board.
our February agenda.
So maybe we need to do a review of the nuisance ordinance, if that's where it falls. I'll work on
And just so everybody knows, if somebody comes to your home, they can't come up and knock on your door and try to sell you something, but they can put stuff in your mailbox. Once
it.
they,
Actually, as they left a business card on my porch.
yeah,
I was shocked they walked that far, they drop off that. Yeah. Instead of leaving it in another car.
usually, I'm the fifth house in my neighborhood, and usually if they get past me, I start getting phone calls. My neighbors call me and say, Mike, there's a guy panhandling, door-to-door salesman, he's got his foot in my door, he won't let me out, he wants a glass of water, he wants to use the bathroom.
Although this sort of falls back to the discussion about deputies, just in general, deputies, they don't memorize 14 different municipalities' ordinances, and if you want something like that enforced, you're going to have your own deputy enforce it.
As long as we have something that's also an ordinance, more problem. Others valid.
But everybody's are different, and really,
I wonder if one of them knows.
your own deputies enforce it. I mean, that's what happens.
Yeah, Brandy's not here every day.
Yeah.
I went in to get ketchup and milk.
We have a 20-minute conversation in produce.
And how many people ask you about 201? No, you know it is.
I can tell you one thing about 201 Central is somebody called me one day and they were asking me, they were talking about having an auction of the, shelves and stuff at the 201 Central. And so I was asking her questions because I was just trying to get an idea. Is there going to be 500 people here or, what is this? And it was, I think, mostly an online auction, and it was going to be like maybe 50 people coming and looking at the items. And then they would have the online auction, and then people would come over a series of days. And it was probably the end of last week, maybe it's still going on, to pick things up. And so I told her, no, we didn't need any permit. It wasn't it was not a mass gathering of people. But I asked her, and she didn't know either.
I won't be surprised if it stays empty, but the moment Cheryl hears anything, she'll let us know.
Oh, I'll let you know.
Especially if it's White Castle.
I was tagged on Facebook about somebody insisting that it's going to be something.
Dollar General.
I had to comment that the village has received no information.
Food line.
And if it fell within their CUP, we might not receive any
That's
information.
what I told them. I said, people ask me, I said, look, unless it's a change to the conditional use permit, it will not come across our desk.
Unless they have to have permits sometimes for upfitting.
Yeah, there'll be an upfit permit.
We might know.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, any discussion out here, all there?
Whew, that was fast.